Hello, I'm Karen Lyon, and I'm so pleased that you're joining us for this year's Literary Hill Bookfest. I'd like to give you a little background to the event. Hello, I'm Karen Lyon, and I'm so pleased that you're joining us for this year's Literary Hill Bookfest. I'd like to give you a little background to the event. 20 years ago, with the guidance of Melissa Asherbronner at the Hill Rag, I started writing a column about Capitol Hill authors. Over the years, it's been my privilege to get to know hundreds of writers whose books I've enjoyed and reviewed. Back in 2010, some friends convinced me to take my column live with a book festival, and the first Literary Hill Book Fest was held in May of 2011 in the North Hall of Eastern Market. And with the sponsorship of Capitol Community News and financial support from the Capitol Hill Community Foundation and other local donors, our celebration of books and authors on Capitol Hill has continued to this day. We look forward to getting back to our live event at some point, but I'm pleased this year to have the opportunity to talk to you without having to compete with the din of the North Hall. So many people have contributed to this effort, and as they say, you know who you are. But I'd like to take a little time to mention just a few. First and foremost, I thank my husband, Ed McManus, who has been our mainstay since day one. His calm and meticulous attention to the daunting logistics, drawing up floor plans, organizing tables and chairs with a little help from the Marines, handling the printing and always having his toolbox at the ready to deal with wind-blown tents or sagging posters, was the glue that held everything together, including me. As you know, the pandemic forced us to go virtual for the first time last year, an effort that would not have been possible without Liz Kogan and her husband, Dan Cohen. They have taken the Bookfest places that Ed and I never could have gone or even dreamed of going. Their energy, enthusiasm, and expertise are unbounded. I stand in awe of the accomplishment that this beautiful website and live event represent. Finally, I want to acknowledge the writers, past and present, who have so heartily embraced the Bookfest. Their talent and passion for what they do is what has kept it going, and I hope will keep it alive and thriving for years to come. In fact, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit here. One of Liz's ideas for the Bookfest this year was to generate a crowdsourced poem, and she asked us all for our ideas for the first line. My suggestion was not chosen, which I'm very glad of, because it allowed me to finish it all by myself. Now, I haven't written a poem since I was 16 years old, so with apologies to all the real poets whose work is represented elsewhere on this site, but from my heart, this is for the writers. Every time I open a book, I am drawn into the author's world, and it becomes part of mine. I think of the hours, days, years, alone, researching, imagining, seeking the perfect phrase that will convey a thought or express a feeling, that will reach a reader, that will spark an idea or touch a heart, that will find me. Thank you, and enjoy the Bookfest.
Washington.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kogan of the Literary Hill Bookfest. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Kogan of the Literary Hill Bookfest, and this is my co-host, the mayor of Capitol Hill. I think we're having some technical difficulties. Let me start again. I'm Elizabeth Kogan of the Literary Hill Bookfest. Gosh, yes, we're having some technical difficulties, I think. What I see on my screen is poet with guitar.
Yeah,
Hi, I hear you, I see you, but I can't see it. A lot of people are frozen. I don't know if they want to have their video frozen.
Well, right now we're just giving our welcome remarks. So I think everyone else should be muted.
Everyone should be muted and have their video off, except Liz and Tim. Thank you.
Are we set? Okay.
Go for it, Liz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Liz Cogan with the Literary Hill Bookfest, and this is my co-host, Tim Krepp, the mayor of Capitol Hill. Hey, Tim.
Hi, Liz. How you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I think this start is a good metaphor for 2021. So ultimately successful, but a little rough around the edges.
Rough around the edges at our start. You look very erudite there in front of your book.
It's my one good and neat bookshelf. The rest are a total mess. So,
well, welcome everybody. We hope that you and your loved ones are doing well. We're very excited that you're able to join us here virtually today. You've just heard from Karen Lyon, the woman behind our beloved annual festival. And as she mentioned, we usually hold a physical event at Eastern Market on the first Sunday in May. And we look forward to the day when we can join you in person again at the North Hall. But over the past year, we have grown to appreciate the possibilities that a virtual event offers. And though we're all a little burned out on Zoom, we think you'll enjoy the program that we have put together for you today. There's a little something for everyone. We think it's less a traditional book festival and more a literary show, sprinkled with little surprises between the more conventional panel discussions and workshops. Having said that, our panel discussions and workshops are going to rock. Tim?
thanks, Liz. I want to go through a couple of folks that we want to give a very brief but sincere shout out to. The folks that have gotten this event going way back when. Of course, we're starting with Karen Lyons. You saw her video as this thing got started here. Karen has been our North Star, has been the one that has kicked off Bookfest. We owe this to her. She's still very involved in choosing authors, working with us. So we really appreciate her. And we really appreciate her husband, Ed McManus. Ed is the one that makes this physically happen. He's had a couple years to rest up right now. So looking forward for next year, Ed, getting back out there and physically setting this back up again and seeing everyone in person next year. So we're very hopeful that's going to happen. Also, putting all this together costs not a huge amount of money, but a little bit of money. And we appreciate the Capitol Hill Community Foundation for providing some funds for that. So we really appreciate that as well. Of course, we have the Hill Rag and of course their parent company, Capitol Community News, that does a great job of publicizing this, that a lot of their authors are featured there throughout the year. So that's a big thank you to them. And finally, this whole design, the web design, all this stuff is Liz's husband, Dan, Sensical Design, which does an amazing job of pulling this all together, often at late nights and frantic emails and all kinds of things. So with thanks to Dan and Sensical Design for putting this all together. Back to you, Liz.
I'd also like to thank our tireless volunteer, Katie Irish. She's a tsunami of creative energy. She came on board just a few short weeks ago, but her enthusiasm has really helped fuel this event. And kudos to our high school volunteer, Olivia Sanchez. Her youthful energy and fondness for Instagram have increased our visibility on this platform, taught us a clever way to highlight our featured authors. Olivia ran an Instagram live she ran an Instagram giveaway featuring the famous custom book bundles from our own Capitol Hill Books. The erudite folks over there can curate a really nice book bundle for you. The winners will be announced today. And if you haven't already done so, check out Olivia's Instagram live interview with Louis Bayard. He's one of our panel moderators today. And follow us on Instagram because we plan more author interviews after today's event. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. We're going to get started with our first panel here shortly, but I want to let you know that on our website, we have, for most of our authors, the books that we're talking about, we have a buy button, and that will take you directly to our local heroes, the East City Bookshop. That will be the ones that will be selling these books, so you can go purchase them in person from East City Bookshop or online through our website, and that'll take you directly over there. So please, if you like someone, support our local authors, support our local bookshop by buying directly from them and then getting that ball rolling here. Now, it's May of 2021. Hopefully no one needs a whole lot of Zoom lessons anymore. Hopefully we can all burn our Zooms and masks fairly shortly, but I'll explain how this works a little bit briefly here. First panel, myself and 7 panelists will be visible on the screen. All of you will be muted and videos hidden, all that stuff, so you have a chance to see that. And as panelists come and go, you'll see that shift over there. So if you have questions for us on any of these panels, we welcome them. We're eager for questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So hopefully everyone is familiar with the Zoom chat function. So go ahead and shout them out there. I see Garrett Peck has already gotten on one there, so we're going to go ahead and mute Garrett Peck for the rest of the day. But anyone besides Garrett that has questions, we would love to hear from them as they go along and do that for the panels. We have a lot of great authors that want to hear things from you, that want to interact with you, so don't be shy with that chat function, again, except for Garrett, and let us know what you're thinking. So, all right.
So we're going to introduce one of our authors, Melanie Choukas-Bradley. You're going to hear from her in a pre-recorded message, and then you're going to hear from her on the panel. But she has a nice introduction to our next panel.
Washington, D.C. is not known enough for how beautiful it is. It's one of the things that makes this city so special. I am an author, and I'm also a naturalist, and I developed a love of nature at a really young age.
It smells delicious.
And then when I moved to Washington, D.C., what I didn't expect was just what a beautiful city it is. I was dazzled. The nickname for Washington, D.C. is City of Trees. And we have Rock Creek Park running right down the middle of our city. It is twice the size of Central Park and is the oldest urban national park in the country. You can walk out your door and enter this amazing park that provides this refuge, and everybody has their place in Rock Creek Park. The whole park is very wild. I love to teach people about trees and wildlife to help people connect with the park. There's so much here to discover. I know, isn't that amazing? Because I would like people to know this city that I know. Natural beauty is woven into all parts of the city. This is the City of Trees. And it's something that has always been really special.
Excellent. All right. Let's see here. All right. I have all the panelists, and you know who you are for panel 1. You can turn on your video. We should be seeing you up here on the screen shortly. Bueller. So,
Tim, I'm not able to unmute. I mean, I can unmute, but I can't start my video. It's blocked.
Thank you. We're having Dan work on that right now, so hopefully we'll be seeing.
Who was that?
All right, give us 1 second here, folks.
There we go.
There we go. All right. Melanie, why don't we start with you here? We just saw your video a second ago. It looked great. What a great intro for our topic here today. And you have several nature books, The Joy of Forest Bathing, which I'd love to hear more about what forest bathing is. And then most recently, Finding Solace at Theodore Roosevelt Island. So if you could tell us, 3 to 4 sentences about that, then we'll move on to our next panelist.
Okay, so yes, so I've lived in Washington for over 40 years. And all during that time, I've been writing about nature, leading nature walks. I am just in love with the beauty of our city, as you could tell in that little video. And by the way, I didn't know you were going to play it. I'm a little embarrassed. But, it's just an embarrassment of riches when it comes to natural beauty in Washington, from our our parks, our gardens, our wild places along the rivers and streams. We're just so blessed with all of this beauty, and there's so much to write about. You know, whether you're writing about nature or if you're writing prose or poetry, you can weave in so much about the physical beauty of the city. So I think we're very lucky to live here. And during the past year, I mean, if you had to be grounded somewhere, this was a pretty darn great place to be grounded.
Indeed. There are worse. There are worse. Thanks, Melanie. Let's see if we can get other folks up here. There we go. I think we have yeah. And I'm just going to randomly kind of go in the order that you guys appear on my screen, and you can't see that, so just deal with it. Let's go with Ethelbert Miller as our next person. Ethelbert, you have been a stalwart at Bookfest here for the year, so we always appreciate you having you on. Ethelbert is a award-winning writer and literary activist. He's a host of the WPFW morning radio show On the Margin with Ethelbert Miller, and producer of The Scholars on UDC TV. And I understand you have a new collection, When Your Wife Has Tommy John Surgery and Other Baseball Stories, poems to be published this fall. So if you could just share a few words about that, we'd love to hear it. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Let me hold on a second. Ethelbert,
there we go. There we go. Right.
There we go. There we go.
That book's not out yet. Beyond a few, right? It's early in the baseball season, but the book that is out right now is "If God Invented Baseball." It's Satchel Paige on the cover, and I say that because one of the things that we see happening in the city is that people are returning to the ballpark. And I think that's a very good sign in terms of, baseball is American pastime. I think, people going down to the park, especially the part of the city where the ballpark is located, will help with the revitalization of our entire city. And so I'm very happy, to be part of this panel and listen to the, my fellow writers talk about the parts of the city that they like. I'm going to the baseball game on Thursday to see the Braves.
Yay!
I can't wait to get the game here very, very soon. It's been a long time. So, thanks, Ethelbert. Next up, we're going to talk to Elizabeth Purcell. Elizabeth is the past and current president of the Capitol Hill Restoration Society, which we know they're good work all around throughout Capitol Hill here. And you recently have a book out, The Capitol Hill Past and Present, which has over 80 pages of before and after pictures on the Hill. And I love those books. I can't wait to see this one. Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yes, I got interested in this by seeing a lot of empty spaces like the ball fields at public schools, or really large buildings like the different libraries, the congressional office buildings, and wondering, was that the first thing ever built there, or was it always empty? And also from talking to neighbors, realized that if you see a big building or you see a large empty space, it probably replaced some really old buildings that we had in our city. And in some cases, we're lucky enough to have photographs of these older buildings. And in other cases, neighbors were incredibly generous and helpful, sharing their information, which I couldn't find anywhere else, about, well, what used to be here and why, like Providence Park, you would never guess there was this giant hospital complex there, or buildings in Garfield Park, other buildings. So anyway, it was wonderful to talk to these people who were very generous, share their stories, and really that's where the book comes from.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I personally miss the brewery that used to be on the Safeway site. So, not the new Safeway is very nice and all, but we'd love to have a brewery. And speaking of breweries, let's jump over to Garrett Peck here, who at one point in the distant past wrote a book about beer and alcohol in Washington, D.C., and prohibition in Washington, D.C., and then had possibly the toughest timing of any release book ever, of a decade of disrupted itself by the pandemic. So Garrett, tell us a little bit about that book and what you've been doing these days.
Thanks so much, Tim, and hello, everyone, and thank you for your support here of the Literary Hill Book Festival. Yes, my book is A Decade of Disruption, and it's to America in the New Millennium, basically covering that first decade. So kind of bookended by the Y2K and the dot-com meltdown, and then the Great Recession at the other end. So hugely disruptive decade. And my book came out on June 2nd last year, which was 8 days after George Floyd was killed, and one day after President Trump had that photo op in Lafayette Square, where they tear gassed everyone. Yeah, That's the one. So it was a really cool book. I love the book. It took me 13 years to write it, and just getting all the different local stories and about what mattered the most in that decade, that first decade of the 21st century. I am, at the moment, I'm actually packing up everything. That's why my walls look rather blank right now, because I'm moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And that'll be this coming Saturday. So jumping on the airplane with my cat.
Quitter.
I'll be a tour guide out there too. So come visit.
Thanks, Garrett. Let's talk to Kim Roberts now. Kim is a poet laureate, a literary historian, an editor who is author of A Literary Guide to Washington, D.C., Walking the Footsteps of American Writers from Francis Scott Key to Zora Neale Hurston, and also 5 other books of poems here. Excellent, thank you. Kim, I just recently purchased that book. I have not had a chance to dig into it yet. You want to tell us about it?
Sure. Actually, I have a newer book than that, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry, please.
But A Literary Guide to Washington, D.C. Does actually provide walking tours that center around some of the most significant writers and writing movements of Washington, D.C. And my new book is sort of a companion to that. It is called By Broad Potomac's Shore, Great Poems from the Early Eras of our nation's capital. And what I've done in this book is I've focused specifically on poets, and specifically on poets who were actively living in and writing about Washington, D.C. from the earliest time, from the city's founding in 1800 to the beginnings of literary modernism to around 1930, 1800 to 1930. And I picked those earlier eras because I think those are stories that are less well known, but also because those were periods of time when poetry was much more accessible and much more a part of everyone's daily life. You would have seen poems printed in every newspaper. They were set to music, sung in churches, at community halls, family meetings. You would often have political rallies or community meetings that would start with people reading poems. It was just, poems were everywhere. And so that interested me a great deal too. I include 132 poets in the book. And I was looking specifically for poets who are a little less well known. So while I do include Walt Whitman and Paul Laurence Dunbar and Frederick Douglass, I also included a lot of poets, specifically women poets, working class poets, and poets of color who are not as well known, but who I believe strongly should be. These are poets who I think their work is just as strong as a lot of the poets who we continue to read, teach in schools, the ones that we talk about as being part of the literary canon. So this was my book, my argument with the existing canon for why it should be expanded. And the book includes lots of poems that reflect on our shared literary history in Washington, D.C. So poems that only could have been written here.
Perfect. Thanks, Kim. All right. I'm going to turn next to Cindy Vasko. Cindy is a photographer, which is a more visual medium. We're looking forward to seeing more about that. But an interesting concept here of abandoned buildings. And this kind of gets back into Elizabeth's what used to be here. So your most recent book is Abandoned Washington, D.C. Effervescent Chronicles. I'm reading that rightly, which is entirely possible I'm not. But it's one of many books you've written on this topic or produced on this topic. Tell us a little bit about abandoned buildings. And I think I see, is that St. Elizabeth's in your background? I can't quite make it out. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm a photographer of many genres, but I'm also an avid urban explorer, meaning that I photograph and document abandoned sites. I joined this activity with my love of writing, and I have 9 books published about abandoned regions in the United States, and 4 more are in the publishing queue.
I discovered the subculture of urban exploration by accident 9 years ago, and it instantly changed my creative focus. My book, Abandoned Washington, D.C., Evanescent Chronicles, is very close to my heart because D.C. is my special city, and I present a new and offbeat way of looking at the city. My D.C. book features a collection of abandonments, forgotten or repurposed, and it includes several historic schools, a famous psychiatric hospital, a veterans home, some industrial sites, and a few public artful statements about our society. I also include the surreal deserted representation of Washington, D.C. in the time of COVID-19 lockdown. And I want the stories about such places to be remembered. And I express this remembrance with my photos and supplement the visual stories with the text of history or philosophical musings. And I want to put a fate in perspective about the cultural losses or lost dreams. And this isn't meant to be morbid, but to inspire reflection and preservation about the hidden stories, history, and mysteries of forlorn spaces.
Thanks, Eddie. And I actually don't mind morbid. Go down that road if you want to. Doesn't bother me. All right. And finally, we'll get to JoAnn Hill. JoAnn Hill is a longtime DC public school teacher and my daughter's math teacher once upon a time in this path. And has recently gone over to co-founding Capital Teachers, excuse me, I'm my words here, a tutoring service. She also has a blog, DC Globetrotters, which I avidly follow. Back when travel was a thing, and hopefully will be again soon. We can follow JoAnn around the hill. And she has a new book, Sacred Washington, D.C., A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure, which tell us about that, JoAnn.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yep, my name is JoAnn, and I wrote Secret Washington, D.C., A Guide to the Weird, Wonderful, and Obscure. And so I have lived in DC for 19 years. And of course, I was a teacher for 17. So I knew a lot about DC and visited many sites and so forth. But I wrote the majority of my book during the pandemic, which actually was a saving grace for me. It forced me to get outside, and it made me shift the focus of my book as well. So a lot of the places in my book are located outside that I could get to, but I also knew that my readers could get to too. So I found myself in a lot of amazing parks like Meridian Park in Northwest, and I found myself in International Park out in Northwest as well, but also cemeteries, so some morbid places, out in Glenwood Cemetery Northeast, and out in Alexandria at St. Paul's and so forth. And I also found myself just exploring outdoor historical markers, so the downtown DC call boxes that celebrate 8 remarkable women throughout history that are found right around the White House in McPherson Square area. I was in Chuck Brown Memorial Park and all of these kind of places that are in my book. So this book gave me actually a lot of joy in the sense of writing, researching, getting outside during a time that we were all kind of stuck inside and couldn't go anywhere. And hopefully being able to provide my readers places to get to too, right? That are outside, free, family friendly, and so forth. So yeah, this was my baby and a lot of fun and gave me a lot of joy during the pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And that kind of segues into my first question here. It's our panel is about finding literary inspiration in Washington, D.C., in and around Washington, D.C. And I think that's always something that as local writers, we want to explore. We want to bring D.C. into our books, into our products here. I'd like to ask you guys, how you found inspiration this year? This year of all years, it can be difficult to find that inspiration to do that. Did any of you face challenges? I myself, at this point last year, felt like such a fraud hosting Literary Hill Bookfest in that I couldn't even open a book. I couldn't focus on a book, and it wouldn't be until July, August where I could get through a book to read, much less to write. So is there anything in the city, in the fabric of Washington, D.C. that has helped you write? I think, JoAnn, you were the last one to go, so if you want to tackle that or pass?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say when I started my book, and then of course, as the pandemic started and continued, my book shifted, as I mentioned. So I realized when the pandemic was going on, I couldn't go into museums and places that I wanted to write about, and not just the typical stories of museums of, these hidden histories. And so I shifted and started including a lot of outdoor places. And so that gave me a lot of inspiration. As I went to see those downtown call boxes, then I started looking into a lot of women's history. And so I have a great story about Joan of Arc statue in the Meridian Park and about how her, her sword kept getting stolen and so forth. But also just learning about how women are starting to get a little bit more represented, but of course still very misrepresented as well. But I also, I started going into different, the Franciscan monastery in Brooklyn and exploring the beautiful grounds and so forth, going to Rockview Park much more than I used to go, and going for hikes and so forth, and, stumbling across the Capitol stones, which are featured in my book. And so those kind of places that weren't initially going to be in my book ended up being in my book because I could get to them. I enjoyed exploring and learning about the history of them, but then again, knowing that also my readers could get to them as well. Of course, when we had no idea how long the pandemic would go on. And so for, this seemed like it might go on for years and years and years. And so just being able to provide places that people could get to and thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. It's you can write a second volume down the road of things that are inside Washington D.C. when we can go back in there. So actually, that's a good segue. Cindy, you want to tell us a bit about your sneaking in, breaking in, getting into abandoned places? I won't ask how you get into these places, but if you want to share a little bit of your inspiration on those.
Yes, it's urban exploration is a solitary endeavor, so the pandemic didn't really change that focus. But I was fascinated with a new type of abandonment in DC during the spring 2020 lockdown phase. It presented a visual trick that was very disturbing to me. It was a city that's normally hyperactive, abruptly forced into a silent pause, makes our brain oversensitive to such modifications. And it was very unnatural to me compared to the abandonments I visit, because it was the empty streets were neat and tidy, and that just didn't gel with my mindset. And it made me contemplate so many other levels about the silence of the city, that with its lack of commotion, it joined with the human fear of contact and then elevated to its cousin suspicion. And urban explorers use the camera to show where we are in society, where we once were but no longer are. But the COVID DC environment during the lockdown phase was a novel, abandoned, alternate reality for me, and one I still can't accept. But it was fascinating nevertheless, even though it was very disturbing to me. And I'm used to going into buildings with absolute silence, but it just didn't seem proper when I went into DC during the lockdown phase and saw very few people, if any, wandering around our national monuments and the streets.
No, I totally understand. I felt this whole year has given me a different experience on history. Yeah. Sitting on the outside of it and being inside of it, and right. This is what an abandoned city feels like. It's a different type of feeling, but it's still disturbing. and actually that kind of gets into what we've lost in the past to what we're seeing today, which brings us back to Elizabeth. You want to share a little bit about how your book has shared of exploring the history of where we came from and what was on these sites, how that might have inspired you?
Yes, a lot of it was, there's also kind of a sense of loss. When you look at these photographs of really amazing buildings like Benjamin Butler's house, which was near the Capitol, was this incredible brick pile, and big enough that he could lend out space to Chester Arthur, people like that. Then nearby, there was a scientific brick building. And these buildings were really big. They were very substantial. And it's sort of odd to think there is absolutely no trace of them left. So there was sort of a part of the book, that wasn't the plan, but sort of kind of an elegy, kind of a sense of loss in many places, is that you wonder if these buildings had survived into the 70s, maybe they would have been saved, and maybe there was something productive that could have been done with them. But that was not the case. And for example, until the late 1940s, when DC government was redoing a lot of their school buildings, there was an incentive economically to demolish these buildings because the value of the bricks and other salvage was so high that the Board of Education said, well, let's demolish the building we'll collect all this money for the bricks and the copper and everything else. And then, so this will be a good thing. And I think the only thing that stopped it, according to the Board of Education minutes, was by, say, 1948, the prices for these salvage materials had dropped to the point that it was more economical to leave the building alone. And one example of that is the Logan School in Northeast, which is now a condominium. So a lot of it, economics, technology, some of these buildings became obsolete and they were taken down. But I think most voraciously, the Library of Congress built 3 huge buildings. And the Congress built a number of office buildings, and they were all right in next to the Capitol, which in the early 19th century, if you wanted to build something like these lucrative boarding houses, you would build them right near the Capitol. And so they were right in the path of this juggernaut starting in the 19th century. So a lot of loss, a lot of change, and there's still a lot left.
A very good point. And quite frankly, with the price of lumber right now, I might be selling my house parts here one of these days. So, Ethelbert, if you could share a little bit about how this year has shaped what you're working on. How do you feel it's been different, or is this more of a continuum of a journey for you?
It's been very productive for me,
Okay.
And it's also been financially good for me because I haven't been going out, and so I've saved a lot of money. And I say that because, as you get older and you're mentoring people, if you take a younger person out, you pay that bill. I mean, that's what happened to me when I started out. So I made sure that I was doing that. But last year I saved money because I wasn't going out and hosting things. But for me, and maybe some of the other writers, it's also an opportunity to take that inner journey. We've talked about visiting the city, but the inner journey of the writer is very important. And I found, for example, for me, I thought a lot about my brother who's deceased, but my brother in the early 60s went into Trappist monastery, became a Trappist monk. And I was saying, wow, my brother, how did he deal with this decision? I can deal with a pandemic, and so what happened is I sat in my backyard, and then I started connecting with nature. And then all of a sudden I started writing all these haiku, and I have a book coming out next year, which is 50 of my haiku translated into Hebrew, because the pandemic also put me in touch with new friends. And so I met a friend of mine through the, email and Zoom. Rafi Ellison was up in Boston. He studied to be a rabbi, and we had a mutual friend in Israel who said, hey, why don't you guys get together? And so you look at, and I have this book coming out, which is an outgrowth of the pandemic. I wouldn't have been sitting in my backyard. I would have been sitting at Busboys and Poets or something like that, reading somebody's work. And I was in my backyard, spiritually, almost like cleansing myself, and then doing what I do. I write, and I started writing, and then I started paying attention to my surroundings, which, not just Rock Creek Park, which I'm like one block from, but from the fact that there was more birds in my backyard. Growing up in the South Bronx, all I saw were pigeons, and when somebody down the street said they saw a hummingbird, I'm going to go down there, violate all the social distancing to see a hummingbird, which I've never seen, but I've seen blue jays, robins, the squirrels were becoming very much active, because people were not out in the streets, and you're by the coyotes that were coming out in Northwest. So I say in a joking way, but it was very good to pay attention to the city and pay attention to myself and say, okay, maybe I can become a better writer by paying attention to detail.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Being present in this is a challenge for all of us, especially those of us that dwell in the past so much. But talking about nature and immersing ourselves in nature and kind of witnessing nature again when it wasn't present with all the activity. It's I've noticed that as myself, and I think that's a great segue into Melanie's book. I want to share, what is forest bathing and how does that apply to Washington, D.C.? I mean, sure, we have a lot of trees, but how does one forest bathe here?
Have you all heard of forest bathing? Do you know anything about it?
Vaguely.
Okay, some do, some don't. Well, it's a practice that started in Japan in the 1980s. So it's a fairly new practice, but it's rooted in the Japanese traditional reverence for nature that's woven into all aspects of their culture. And all it is it's kind of like a meditation. It's sort of connected to meditation, Tai Chi, and yoga. And all it is you go out in nature, you breathe deeply, and you tune into the beauty and wonder around you with all your senses. And it's something you can do in a forest, but you can also do it in any city park, in a garden, in your backyard, even on your porch. You know, I have been leading virtual forest bathing walks, and people have been looking out their windows or sitting on their porches or balconies. So it's all about, you know, being fully present, just being fully present and open to the beauty and wonder of the moment. So I do have a book out that came out in 2018 called The Joy of Forest Bathing. And then I had 2 books published during the pandemic. Finding Solace at Theodore Roosevelt Island came out in September. But in March, right when the pandemic hit and we got our first lockdown orders, my publisher contacted 10 of his authors and asked us all to write books about resilience. And my assignment was to write about connecting with nature in a time of crisis. So that's what I did. And it was really amazing because when the pandemic first hit, it also coincided with spring in Washington, and all of a sudden, you know, it was quiet. You know, we didn't have the traffic. The skies cleared. The skies were clearer and quieter. And so for somebody like me who's a naturalist, there were some positives in that. And when I interviewed friends from all around the country who I knew were nature lovers, and they were finding this, you know, just kind of deep, what you were talking about just now, that deeper connection, that inner, you know, really connecting with your inner life. And also, people shared with me how they were feeling about our whole human impact on the earth and climate change. And it just was a time of reflection. So it was like this awakening of spring, this awakening of the pandemic, and a time of reflection. And I found that it was a really good time to write a book. I had to finish the book in 2 weeks. I usually take years to write a book. And my deadline was 2 weeks. The books were out in May. But just tapping into that first, you know, it was like a jolt, it was like an awakening that people were experiencing. It was really pretty profound.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you, Melanie. It's definitely been a strange time for all of us, but the opportunity to see that nature, to experience it in this urban environment, it's probably something we'll only have once in our life. So that's in that sense. But thank you. And speaking of that inspiration, I mean, this gets into the spoken word and the poetical word here. Kim, can you share a little bit about how going back in past and to the future has affected your view of this?
Sure, thanks. Well, we know that people turn to poetry during times of difficulty as a solace. Certainly I found myself doing that during the pandemic, but also have been talking with others about the mythology. I was looking at poems that would comfort, poems that would reinforce my experience, but I was also doing the opposite, Tim. I found myself oftentimes talking about the poems in the book that were written by abolitionist poets. DC was a hotbed of abolitionist activity in the years leading up to the Civil War. And a lot of those poems for me were sort of historical background, a sort of baseline for better understanding the Black Lives Matter movement. I have a number of poems in the book that are by early sort of proto-feminists that to me connected directly to the Me Too movement. It felt to me like I wanted both during this difficult time. There were times when I wanted sort of the comfort and the solace, and there were times when I was better able, because of the strangeness of the pandemic, to really engage with what was challenging and to think deeper about some of the issues around, what makes DC get used as a sort of model city, as a city that reflects the country as a whole, and why we have been the center of so many important movements in the nation's history. And so many of those movements started here because Congress didn't have some local governmental authorities to appease. They could just try out their new ideas because they were in control. And so that makes the city just, I don't know, a fascinating place to look at. But also, I feel like that history is so important for understanding a lot of really important contemporary issues like DC statehood, and how DC statehood is tied to racism. And so I feel like in a way the pandemic allowed me to take on some more intellectual challenges as well.
No, thank you, and that's a great point that you bring up there. We'll talk about the pandemic of this year, but by no means was it the only thing. In many ways, not even the most important thing going on in some things. I think Melanie mentioned global warming. Of course, we've had Black Lives Matter coming to the forefront this year and getting some really needed attention. Hopefully, progress being made there. 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes, but trying to see things. And of course, the Me Too movement didn't go away, and so when you talked about the role of women, I know that's something that JoAnn has dealt with in her works as well, of both the role of women today as well as remembering underreported stories of the past. So those are all things. We have time. We have just about wrapping up our panel here. I'm going to ask everyone to very quickly. We had a question about, with all the stereotypes that we face in Washington D.C. as a home of political stuff, we forget about the real D.C. If you could share with me the one place, the one thing, the one item, just really quickly here, that makes DC real to you, that's your real DC. It can kind of segue into the favorite part of DC, although you can't say Congressional Cemetery, that's my favorite part. So if you wish to share just a one line, whatever place, event, thing that makes DC real to you. Let's just go in order here, in my order. You wouldn't be able to see it. Garrett.
Cool. I have a number of places that are really exceptionally special for me.
Give me one.
Give me one. Okay, this one. And actually, I wrote up in the chat. The Congressional Cemetery is a super special place for me. And I've had a book launch party in there where we took the public vault, where Dolly Madison's remains were. We turned that into a cocktail lounge. It's such a cool place, just because it has this wonderfully absurd sense of humor about the place. It's a beautiful and glorious urban garden, and it's great seeing all the dogs that are there. It is such a special place for me. And yes, it's a cemetery. It's awesome.
Same. I quite enjoyed it. It's only 3 blocks over that way. So, Melanie, for you.
It's like trying to pick a favorite child. But I have to say the Frederick Douglass home, which I'm very sad it's been closed I think it's still closed. It's been closed all during the pandemic. It is in Anacostia. He is my hero, abolitionist, women's rights advocate, and a lot of people don't know he was a real nature lover. I have seen flowers and ferns that he pressed between the pages of his books in his extensive library after teaching himself to read as a slave. And the fact that he lived on this beautiful hill overlooking the city for the last years of his life, having been born in slavery, and his journey all through his life, I just find that such an inspiring place.
It really is.
Both historically and for the beauty.
Oh, quite so, yeah. And we are pressing against time, so I'm going to ask the other ones just to give me a really short one here. So, JoAnn?
Yeah, so mine doesn't sound as profound initially, but when I explain a little bit about it, you'll understand why I love it so much. I mentioned in the chat Barbie Pond on Avenue Q in the DuPont Logan Circle area. And while it is a quirky art installation of Barbie dolls, I think what I love about it so much is that this art installation actually represents so many things. So there are themes of activism and the political climate in DC. It celebrates different cultures and festivals and celebrations and holidays in a fun, artistic weird kind of way. The couple who have this pond, they're pretty anonymous, so not many people really know them and so forth. And it just brings people stop by in the front of the yard with this Barbie pond, and it's incredible. It's outside. People come and enjoy it. Every time I leave with a huge smile on my face, amazed about what these artists can do with Barbie dolls, and also how they can really promote activism and being and inclusion and creativity. And so that's one of my favorite places in DC. I go there quite a bit.
That's fascinating. I have not actually seen this one yet, so that's a new one on me. I'm looking forward to checking it out.
I think you would love it. It's in my book. You would love it. Yeah.
Ethelbert?
Would have to be Howard University. If it was not Howard University, I wouldn't be here in Washington, D.C. But one minor note I would also add, Frederick Douglass was also, and his sons were also avid baseball fans. Just had to put that in there.
Absolutely, absolutely, rightly so. Absolutely, thank you, Ethelbert.
Okay.
Kim?
Well, I have spent so much of my time in archives, and we are rich in great archives in DC, but I guess I'm going to name as my place the Library of Congress, which is just an unparalleled archive in the nation. And neither of the two books that you mentioned of mine would exist without their incredible resources.
We take it for granted, and we should. It is an amazing place. You know. Cindy?
Yes, I'll have to say Rock Creek Park because it holds endless treasures and gifts, but it also holds two abandonments, which I love. The magnificent Carter Barron Amphitheater, which has been silent for too many years. It's such a beautiful setting with 360 degrees of nature around it. And there's also the East Portico Capitol stones that are unceremoniously dumped in a pile, but I find them fascinating every time I go there. It's so much history just setting in a pile. And fortunately, though, the columns were moved to the National Arboretum, but it just seems unfair that such history isn't given a more revered status. But it is a beautiful park to do anything, hiking, visual splendor. It's just amazing we have that in our backyard.
There is. We're lucky to have it. Thank you, Cindy. And finally, Elizabeth.
Yes, I would say the Little Tavern on the 600 block of Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. The building is still there. Hopefully it will be restored to its glory.
That was a deep one, and I appreciate it. Now that you're making me miss Little Tavern, the pool table in the back was always a lot of fun place to hide out. So thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. I want to thank all of our writers and our panelists for coming on here today. I talk about these places like talk about old friends I haven't seen in a long time. So I'm looking forward to getting out and seeing a lot of them soon. And the Barbie place, that's totally new to me. So that one I look forward to checking out. So thank you very much for appearing here. And we hope you guys enjoy the rest of the other panels.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, and as we're cycling back here, I think we'll be turning over to, Liz and I here in just a second. I do want to note that all of our writers that have books for sale, you can go to the webpage, Literary Hill Bookfest webpage, click next to the name, there should be a buy your book, and you can purchase books right from East City Book, a local bookshop here. And so get a plug in there and buy local for both authors and books. Liz, you're muted. So.
Okay. And what I see on my screen, and I am no tech wizard, I still see Garrett and Kitty and JoAnn. So I don't know if our tech guy can hear me, but we're right now doing a little spot with Laura. So, hi, Laura.
Hey, the default view at this point should be speaker view. So hopefully people are just seeing the person speaking.
Okay. Now I just see, I don't know. Tim, what do you see on your screen?
I see you. So
Okay, great. Okay. So I'd like to introduce us, our special guest, Laura Hankin. Laura is the author of Happy and You Know It, and most recently A Special Place for Women, which one critic called one of the smartest, sharpest, and funniest books I've read in years. She has written for publications like McSweeney's and HuffPost, and her musical comedy has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and more. She splits her time between New York City, where she has performed off-Broadway, and Washington, D.C., where she once fell off a treadmill twice in one day. So Laura is going to be joining us, and we're very excited about that. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So let's see, we will.
Should I go ahead and do the song, or do you want to do the Q&A first?
Do you want to do the song first or the Q&A?
Let's do the song first, get it out of the way. So Elizabeth asked me if I would do a rendition of the song that I wrote last year when Happy and You Know It came out May 2020, and I had my book tour canceled. And so I made a little music video called Indoor Book Tour. So I'm going to attempt to do it for you right here, right now. I was supposed to go on book tour, baby, but now we're all stuck at home. But I ain't giving up on book tour, baby. Come on, let's do it on our own. Indoor book tour, can't travel anymore. Indoor book tour from home. I was supposed to start in New York City, have a big lunch with my friends. Instead, I staged a reading for my kitty. It's not a real cat, it's this weird wooden doll. A real cat is too much responsibility. Indoor book tour, signing books and asking who's this for? No one. Indoor book tour from home. Then I was gonna hop a plane to Chicago, but now that's out of my control. And since I can't eat deep dish pizza in Chicago, I eat a normal slice of pizza from a bowl. I was excited to meet all my readers, but now I look for them online. There are some nice reviews I found on Goodreads, but some don't like it, and I tell myself that's fine. Indoor book tour, I'm not insecure. Answer reader questions on my bathroom floor. Book tour from home. I was gonna tour like all my favorite authors, maybe even be in the same room. Now it don't matter if you're me or if you're famous. Even Margaret Atwood has to figure out Zoom. So I guess Stephen King and I are exactly the same. Indoor book tour. Fans are always knocking at my door. And by fans, I mean my fiance asking if I'm okay. Don't need a plain pillow anymore. Indoor book tour. Please support your local indie store. Indoor book tour. Book tour from home. The end.
Thank you, Laura. That was fabulous. Fabulous. Loved it. Loved it. I don't think traditional book festivals have live musical performances, so thank you.
I'm so happy to help break the mold.
You actually answered my first question. I wanted to ask what inspired you to make Indoor Book Tour. So I think you've answered that, but if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like to try to publish a book and market it during a pandemic. I mean,
it was rough. And I think I had these nightmare scenarios in my mind of like, oh my God, the book's going to get canceled entirely. What if the warehouses have to shut down and we can't even print it or send it out? And luckily, it never got that bad. And I know a lot of other books did get pushed, but mine stuck to the schedule. And I was lucky enough that it was selected as a book of the month choice in May, Happy and You Know It, May 2020. And for those who don't know, Book of the Month is this like subscription box service where members get to pick one from 5 books each month and it gets sent to you. So that was like, I always had that in my back pocket of like, okay, they have a lot of subscribers. They're used to getting their books in the mail. That'll be good. At least I have that. But it was sad. I mean, writing a book is lonely. And so I think you really look forward to that moment where you get to celebrate it with your community. And then that just went away. And my book tour got canceled. I found out, I was supposed to do a big reading at a bookstore in New York that I loved so much. And I found out that the event got canceled through a Facebook event notification. But then other bookstores like really adapted so well. East City, for example, just was amazing. And they pivoted so quick and were like, we can do Zoom events. We got you. So I'm really thankful to them. And I think this is a very long and rambling answer. Sorry.
No, it's great. No, it's great. It's thank you. No, it's very interesting. I also just wanted to ask you, you have such a unique career with being both a performer and a writer. I think that's fairly uncommon. And just wondering if you have any upcoming projects. Do you have any live performances in the works? Where can our viewers find your work?
Well, I am going to have a new music video coming out for A Special Place for Women. I'm filming one tomorrow, a la indoor book tour, because I think the Penguin Random House team was like, oh, you really went for it. Let's do another one with this book coming out. Unfortunately, live performances have really been put on hold. So who knows for that. But, working on a new book, working on some other projects. Thank you for asking.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. We loved it. Thanks for being part of Bookfest this year.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's see. I think we're on for our next workshop, right? So Dan, do we have the slide for the workshop? Great. So I want to let you know that if you'd like to, for those of you who want to participate in one of our writing workshops, you'll need to leave this meeting in a few minutes, around 12 noon, and enter the new meeting ID that appears on your screen now into Zoom. So you might want to take a look at that meeting ID. You could also go to our website, which is literaryhillbookfest.org, and use the link there to join the workshops. The meeting ID is the same for both workshops. Our workshop monitor will then move you into the workshop of your choice. You'll need to pick one or the other as they are running simultaneously. I just want to give a shout out now to the Writer Center. So those of you who are taking part in one of our workshops today or our other viewers, you can continue your writing exploration through the Writer Center. They have some wonderful online workshops, and they're also very affordable, and they occasionally will have a pop-up workshop. So check their website, the Writer Center, and look into the workshops that they're offering. I think we have a little treat right before our next panel and right before the workshops start. Tim, would you like to talk about that?
Thanks, Liz. Yes, we're going to show a short video here by Teri Ellen Cross Davis. It's just a really incredible series of poems here. Teri Ellen Cross Davis is the author of Hank poems, winner of the 2017 Ohioana Book Award for Poetry, and more recently, A More Perfect Union, which is being lauded as a blood oath to Black motherhood. She is a Cave Canem Fellow and serves as poetry coordinator for our own Folger Shakespeare Library. So.
Hi, my name is Teri Ellen Cross Davis. I'll be sharing a few poems from my second collection, A More Perfect Union. This first poem is called A Black Woman Gets a Window Seat on Aer Lingus. Aer Lingus is one of the more popular airlines into Ireland. Enough, Ireland. For all your lush effusion of color, inside me blooms a masochistic loneliness. Give me the screws I know best. The policeman quick to test my yes sir as acidless. Trigger the Midwest. Never on the Bible school test was this. Crucifixion kills, not nails into feet or wrist, but the weight borne upon the breast. You suffocate slowly in your own flesh. As I return to the upright cross of the U.S., I breathe easier, I breathe less. This second poem is called The Goddess of Cleaning. I bequeath you bleach, its singeing sting. I bequeath you the scrub brush, best done on hands and knees. I bequeath you ammonia for the exorcism of dirt. I bequeath you power over clutter, the washing machine spin, the dryer's lint grin. I bequeath you the salvation of sweeping, a consecrated grip on the broomstick. I bequeath you the dustpan's collection plate, the floor's sanctified echo, the trash bin's penitent face. I bequeath you the gospel of a mop, the sacred slosh of a rinse bucket's second coming. I bequeath you the torn t-shirt as rag, the two-sided sponge, vinegar and newspaper squeak, the glass free of streak. I bequeath you an old toothbrush for tiles hard to reach grime. I bequeath you the grunt and scrub of wool, the eradication of rust. Trust in me, I baptize you in sweat, labor's beatific stain. I bequeath you the power to change, one room at a time. And this last poem is called Partus Sequitur Ventrum, and that has an epigraph, and the epigraph reads, a Latin phrase that stands for the principle that the children of an enslaved woman are themselves born as slaves and owned by their mother's master. Part 1, Mourning. His knobby 6-year-old knees, his anxious pace as if to keep step with the question's steady overflow. Is there a giant octopus in the Bermuda Triangle? How is paper made? How do fireworks know when to explode? No one told me black boys could burn so bright. Wait, I am wrong. The dark sky has seen their fire snuffed by white hoods, malevolent blue eyes, and bluer uniforms. White women's screams, all have been matched to their tender wood. So I hug my son tight, kiss the curl crop so close it's straight. My mother eye insatiable. He is dessert and I'll always have seconds. Each morning I lick my thumb, clean him up good, wishing in vain the amniotic sac had dried to armor. 2, night. His lisp, loose, syrupy sweet, sneaks into my ear. Feel its heat, small source more flicker than flame, flanked by arms still dreaming of muscle. He claims my squishy stomach the best pillow. If the security of our locked arms could extend beyond growth spurts, clocks, calendars, to the someone interviewing him, to the someone following him in the store, to the someone holding my son's life in trembling fingers poised above a phone's keypads. Let my love be a note safety pinned to his chest. Send him back, alive, unharmed. As a Black mother in America, I know my wells are birthright, pinned with iron, penned in ink. Thank you.
Oh, 1, 2, 3.
Right. Okay. Looks like we're ready for our second panel. Liz, are we hearing me here?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes,
Oh, right.
me Tim. Yep.
Let me go ahead and jump onto that second panel here. It will be the power of children's literature to dismantle divisions. You can see that right up there. We're gonna jump on in here. You can see Lou Bayard front and center over there with his hands up there. Lou has all kinds of writing to his credit, and you can go to the website for all the other ones, Reporting Mr. Lincoln, wonderful things. But what he doesn't have on there, and I want to put a plug in for, is the Downton Abbey recap for the New York Times. So if you have a chance to go read those were wonderful back in the day. So I really, they should be higher in the building there, Lou. But regardless, I'm going to turn it over to Lou now, and he'll introduce his panelists.
Thank you, Tim. Liz, I know you're listening. How much time do we now have since we're starting a little bit late? Do we still run 45 minutes or what? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're a little flexible on time, so okay. you can go a little long if you need to. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have a diverse and gifted group of DMV children's book writers to address this topic of the power of children's literature to dissolve divisions. I can't wait to hear what they all have to say. So to begin with, I'm going to introduce each author and have them talk briefly about their most recent work. We have a good number of folks and a finite amount of time, but I want to make sure we hear from everyone before this hour is out. I'm going to start, Maya, if it's okay, I'm going to start alphabetically. Is that all right? We start with you. Great. Maya Ajmera is the president and CEO of the Society for Sciences and the Public and the publisher of the Science News Media Group. She is also the founder of the Global Fund for Children and the author of more than 20 books, which is insane, including most recently Back to School. And I think that's the book she's going to talk to us about today. Maya, please. Oh, you're muted, I think.
Sorry. Thank you so much for having me today. Really pleased to be with such an esteemed group of panelists and children's book authors. So my book, Back to School, is part of a series of books really looking at the similarities that all children have around the world. I started this journey in 1994 with my first book, Children from Australia to Zimbabwe, and it was based on global travels I had done as after college. And with, just a camera on my neck, I started taking photographs and started seeing that we all have more similarities than we have differences. And how do we celebrate those similarities? And so what I found with children is children love to play. They love going to school. They love wearing really interesting clothes. They love eating. They love their families. And that is what is the connector of my books. And Back to School is part of a series of books that starts with To Be a Kid, and then arts around the world, and then neighborhoods around the world. But this is about schools around the world and really looking, and they're photo illustrated books, but really looking at how kids go to school. And they all love going to school, but they learn differently. And they go to school differently, whether it's under a tree or in a schoolhouse, or they go on a school bus or a rickshaw to school, or they walk to school or ride their bicycle, but they're all going towards the same vision and mission. So I'll leave it at that, Lou.
Great. Thank you so much. Next up is Kitty Felde. She is an award-winning reporter and talk show host who covered Capitol Hill for public radio for nearly a decade. And she is bringing us a character by the name of Fina Mendoza. Do you want to set that up for us, Katie?
Sure. So I came to Washington as a California kid, and I fell in love with Capitol Hill. I fell in love with the US Capitol. I absolutely adored running around the halls of Congress and talking to people. And, you know, when I would tell stories about what I was doing to people back in California, it was like you were talking about you had just been to Mars or someplace like that. There was just no cultural connection at all with what I was experiencing every day. And I found that particularly true with kids, especially kids on the West Coast who never got that 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. And so I really wanted to share that with people who maybe can't ever afford to get on an airplane and come out with a group of 8th grade kids and run all around the US Capitol if they ever let us back inside again. So when I was covering Congress, I met a lot of members and their kids and their pets who roam the halls of the House office buildings. And a young woman I had mentored for many years in Southern California lent me her name, and I imagined her as the daughter of a congressman from Southern California who has to move to Washington, D.C., and ends up solving mysteries inside the US Capitol, including The Mystery of the Demon Cat of Capitol Hill, which was the first book, Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza. And then the second one, and these are all middle grade novels, is coming out in August. And it's about a bird, a very mysterious bird that poops on the head of the president during the State of the Union address. And it's called State of the Union. And so Fina is assisted by her Dr. Watson, is a very large French Briard dog that belongs to a Republican member of Congress from Georgia. And he's very wise and doesn't talk, but he pretty much understands what she has to say. And so that's the way I get to introduce backstage at Congress and sort of looking at the sausage making of Capitol Hill, but through the eyes of a 10-year-old kid from California.
Oh, that sounds like great fun. And you even get the Georgia Bulldog in there. So that's awesome. Oh, Courtney, I'm so glad you're here. She is writer, director, and founder of the East of the River Book Festival. Shout out from our side of the river. During the pandemic, she was inspired to create an online forum called Author to Author, in which she presents bi-monthly conversations with authors talking about creating children's books. So tell us what you're here to talk about today, Courtney.
Hi, sorry I'm so late, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat a little bit about not only the book, A is for Anacostia, which introduces my community. I'm a resident of Anacostia, and introducing that in its historical figures, popular places, to not only people who live in the community, but also to newcomers to DC who want to enjoy fun places like the Big Chair or the Anacostia River, the outdoor skating pavilion, which is so much fun, particularly during this time, during a pandemic, where we can have fun during and still be socially distanced from each other. Really introducing a lot of places that don't get a lot of airplay on TV or on the radio. We always still like to invite people to come to Anacostia and enjoy themselves. And we have lots of new families that are enjoying the community, I think, as a result of that, just having a great time. But I also want to share a podcast that I'm the host of called The Way We Self-Publish. So for authors that are brand new to the profession and are just new writers that are interested in creating children's books, I want to enjoy you to come to wherever you access podcasts, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. It's a podcast that speaks to, I'd say, new writers and those who are very interested in the backstories behind books. So it's been a lot of fun. We have about 5 episodes on right now and looking towards moving forward and having more.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Remind me the name of the podcast again?
Sure, it's called The Way We Self-Publish.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Grant Goodman is an English teacher in Montgomery County, I think, who started writing action adventure novels for his middle school students. He has since graduated to teaching high school, but is continuing to publish books in his Agent Darcy and Ninja Steve series. So Grant, please tell us about your most recent installment.
You got it, sure. So yeah, in addition to the English teaching, I used to be a martial arts instructor as well. And I have always been a fan of cartoons and comics. And all of that led to, my inspiration for wanting to create a book series. I'm not an animator. I'm not a visual artist. That avenue was closed off, but always had a love for stories. And that led me to Agent Darcy and Ninja Steve. So Tiger Trouble was my first book. It's about a 12-year-old ninja and a 13-year-old secret agent in training. Ninja Steve lives in an all ninja village. He goes to ninja school. Agent Darcy is 13. She's in training at the Bureau of Sneakery, learning the ways of secret agents. And it is about the two of them and their friendship, and exploring a world that has all kinds of different countries with all kinds of complicated histories with each other. And I guess from a larger scope, taking a look at how the younger generation has a chance to look past some of the conflicts that their parents' generation may be rooted in. My latest book is Agent Darcy and Ninja Steve Shogun Showdown, which has a ninja on a giant dragon roller coaster. Which is, I don't know, it brings me joy when I get to see that picture on the front cover. But it was something that came out of my pandemic writing, and is the fourth novel in the series, and takes Darcy and Steve to a new place. But my world is full of ninjas and spies and samurai and ghosts and robots and all of the things that I absolutely loved growing up and still love reading and writing about today.
It's so much fun. Can you tell us who did that gorgeous artwork?
Sure. So the artist's name is Tristan George. Happens to be a good friend of my younger brother's. They went to high school together, and he just does some absolutely jaw-dropping artwork, and I am so lucky to have him on board for my book series.
Yeah, beautiful stuff. Thank you. Glen Mourning has been a fourth grade teacher in DC public schools for more than a decade. He is the author of the Crunchy Life series, which he wrote to inspire young people like himself who grew up in urban America to get an education and fulfill their full potential, and is here to talk to us about the most recent book in that series, Recess Detention. Take it away, Glen.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. And of course, thank you so much for allowing me to participate. This is the third year of being able to come together with this community of just amazing authors and just change makers in the community down here in DC. Just one quick brief correction that I meant to send out. Within the Crunchy Life Kids series, in book 1 of 7 different titles. So the Crunchy Life Kids series is something that I had thought of when I noticed and recognized the challenges and struggles that the minority youth in DC were having in terms of connecting in their language arts classrooms. I taught 4th and 5th grade language arts in DC for about 4 years before transitioning over to Fairfax County by way of Connecticut, where I started my teaching career. But it came to my knowledge that a lot of our boys, even some of the girls, were just so reluctant to pick up a book and read, right? And I started to just survey children and ask questions, as opposed to just assuming and then throwing books in front of their faces during our reading groups and our reading blocks. I really wanted to get down to the heart of, is this an issue of children who don't want to read, or do they just simply not have anything that they want to read in front of them, right? So, I did a little bit of research and I came to the conclusion that, if we have an authentic and genuine story to tell, then most of our students, especially in Southeast, that have challenges that may not be as, common to some of the folks in some of the suburbs down in the DC area, kids would really see themselves in books and find that as almost an entry point to wanting to then go off and read other titles, right? So the Crunchy Life Kids series, just in short, and I know we're kind of pressed for time, but it follows the journey of a 10-year-old boy who lives in Southeast DC, and he goes to a fictional charter school, and you learn all about the situations and emotions that are tied to living in perhaps, urban America, where students are just really challenged with understanding, what it means to be a child of color growing up in inner city. where education may not be the first, thing on your mind when you wake up, or you have other responsibilities to be a big brother, but also even take the role of a parent at times, right? With some of your responsibilities that unfortunately kids, in urban America have to deal with. But what makes the Crunchy Life series so awesome is that, although you have this journey of, a former NFL superstar who becomes a classroom teacher, which is like Michael Jordan becoming the teacher in my kids series, you also have these fairy tales that are embedded throughout the series, anywhere from Cinderella to the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf. And they're just told from the different renditions to allow students to have this universal, understanding that you have to persevere through challenges, but also to entertain students as well, so that they can, see themselves in stories and then want to go off and continue reading the series. So, as an entry point for hopefully falling in love with literature later on in life, the Crunchy Life series, is something that I hold dear to my heart as a solution to curb this learning gap that students are facing in America now.
Great. Thank you so much, Glen. Thank you. Our final pair of panelists are a tag team. So I'm going to introduce first one of them, and then she's going to introduce her collaborator. Lucinda Robb was project director for Our Mothers Before Us, Women in Democracy, 1789 to 1920 at the Center for Legislative Archives. She also helped organize the National Archives celebration of the 75th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. So take it away, Lucinda.
Hi, my name is Lucinda Robb, and I am one of the co-authors of the Suffragist Playbook, Your Guide to Changing the World. And I had the good fortune of writing this book with a friend of mine, Rebecca Roberts. And I'm going to let Rebecca talk a little bit about this book. And she has this fascinating background. She's done all these different things, but probably the favorite thing that I've done with her is write this history of the suffrage movement. So Becca, take it away.
Thanks, Lucinda. So I'm Rebecca Roberts. My day job is curator of programming at Planet Word, the new Museum of Words and Language in the historic Franklin School at 13th and K Northwest. So all of you book nerds out there, please come visit. It's just as awesome as you've heard it is. But I'm here to talk about the Suffragist Playbook, which Lucinda and I co-wrote. And it's a young adult pitched book, but there's really nothing in this that's over the head of, a smart younger reader. And actually we have found from a lot of our adult friends who felt that they did not know enough about the suffrage movement, that it's kind of a girlfriend's guide to the suffrage movement as well. But in addition to the history, we felt very strongly that this should be a practical, informal way to take the lessons of the suffrage movement to become an activist yourself. So you learn what happened in the movement, you learn what went wrong, you learn what went right, but it's with this playbook method of helping young people who don't need us to convince them to become activists. They have plenty of models out there, how to learn from a previous movement that was long and slow and hard, but ultimately successful.
Great. Thank you. All these books sound fabulous. And by the way, for people watching, you can order anything through the Bookfest. You go to the author bio, and I think there's a link right next to that, where you purchase through eCity Books, our local bookstores. So please feel free to buy all these books, buy as many as you want for friends and family. I want to reiterate, I guess, that the title of this panel is about the power of children's literature to dissolve divisions. And so I'm just a question I'll pose for you all generally. Is there something about children's literature that is uniquely equipped to accomplish that mission? What do folks think?
Well,
go Maya.
Well, I actually am going to say that children's literature has had some issues, right? That we haven't had inclusion and different voices, and the narrative stories of people of color, children of color. This has been a big issue in children's literature, and I think it's finally starting to change, but slowly. And even with my work, when I got my first book published, Children from Australia to Zimbabwe, no one wanted to publish it. Everyone said, there's no market for a diversity book like this. Who would want to buy it? I self-published a book in 1994. Go figure, you self-publish something in 1994, and then you sell it as hard as you can. And then the same publisher that turned you down said, we want this book and all your other books. And I ended up saying no to all of them and picking up a medium-sized publisher called Charles Bridge up in Boston. But it's part of a larger narrative that I'd love to hear from others, that hopefully this is changing, but it's been slow.
I would say from our experience that it's definitely changing. Ours is not a children's book, it's a YA, but our publisher's Candlewick, and I would say they pushed us to be more sensitive, to be more inclusive. We, for instance, in the book, instead of just identifying Black suffragists as Black, we identify white suffragists as white. Why are you only pointing out race when the suffragist is Black, right? So and they paid for a sensitivity reader. They, really, we always wanted to make sure that particularly the racism of the suffrage movement was called out as a negative lesson for contemporary activists, but they really made us stronger and better in that area. So at least from one anecdotal experience, Candlewick really is on board.
And I would say Charles Bridge Publishing as well.
That's great to know. That's great to know. Glen, this brings up the point you introduced earlier. You felt there wasn't enough reading material targeted to these particular constituencies, to young Black kids in Anacostia, say.
Yeah, for sure. But not only, do the top 5 or have the top 5, largest publishing companies within the last 4 or 5 years make the shift, right? But more so than that, this narrative of, what it looks like to be other than the majority, sometimes it's limited to, to cliche or to, what you would refer to as kind of just like the run of the mill, the Black kid has to be the basketball player, or the Asian American has to be, smart in math, right? So sometimes those experiences that are, while they may have some truth to them and they're important to highlight, to allow kids to connect, that's not the entire story, right? And one thing that I just wanted to throw in there on top of, is it Dr. Maya? I'm sorry. But
call me Maya. Just call me.
I got you. But one thing that I wanted to make sure that I got through was, while children's literature has this opportunity to introduce children to diversity and to, provide a foundation of inclusion, right? I don't necessarily think that the problem right now in education, at least from a literature, language arts approach, is the lack of diversity, as you're seeing this really huge boom of publishing companies start to really throw those, give the green light to some of those those diverse characters. But more so than anything else, the institutions that establish the division has to be dismantled intentionally, right? And it has to be progressive. So I can't be in kindergarten or first grade and have a book, all about us. We're all beautiful. We're all the same. We all are unique, right? And then go on to middle school and high school and then have the system or the, what has already been established in terms of curriculum or even community engagement or conversation not reflect what I saw and thought as a second, third, fourth grader going into high school. So to have that conversation when kids are 18 and 25 is way too late. These conversations have to start happening in kindergarten, but they have to continue happening throughout the grade levels and in your own homes.
Even earlier, I would say board books.
Yeah. These are all great points. Courtney, you as an expert in self-publishing, is self-publishing been a way to create diversity in the book world that wasn't there before?
I think many authors feel, and including myself, feel like self-publishing is the one way. It's not a way to the pipeline to a traditional publisher. It is the only option that we have to get our story out. And similar to Maya, when I figured, for me, I did not choose I did not choose a traditional publisher. I thought, well, you know what? I'm writing about my own community. It's a small community. I'm thinking, okay, I just want the students in my school to know about our community. And then it grew into, okay, but wait a minute, maybe since I'm talking about a historic community, maybe all the kindergartners need to know about this story. Then all the pre-K and kindergartners. Then I'm like, no, all the kids in Anacostia. I'm like, no, this is a community in DC. And then it just grew and it grew. But from the beginning, I felt like this is not a story that's large enough for a traditional publisher to want it at all. So I said, okay, let me go ahead and try this self-publishing route. But like many other publishers, their stories, they too feel like their stories are not big enough, not to be purchased by a larger company, and to be shared and highlight the way the characters look. As much as we keep hearing that message now about how representation is so important, it's important for the artists to get recognized, the writers as well as the illustrators. That wasn't the same message that I've been hearing, even 5, 10, my book is 10 years old, longer than that. So we really wanted to, when you think about self-publishing, it's because folks have not been heard. They don't feel like they've been heard or seen, and they're taking it in their own hands to make it happen. They're going to force their dream to move forward and to force it into the hands of the people that want it. I think it's key to say that it's not that we're trying to force a dream that does not want to be heard by parents and by children, because unlike any other group, for children's book authors, we have to make sure that the parents like our story as well as the child. So when the parents like it, they will make sure that the child hears that story or engages in that book. And so what we're finding now, and I think what larger companies are noticing, is that, oh, wow, there is a place for that Anacostia story. There is a place for those students in that small rural community. There is a place for that family that speaks a language other than English. And so I think we continue to look at these stories, and also let's look at the data. I think the latest data that I've seen since 2019 was that the numbers of stories written by Black folks is so low. I think it's the other groups. You could put all of them together, and we still don't have as many authors that are published in the traditional public published arena. So this continues. Self-publishing continues to be our way. I think our stories are being heard more, but by far not enough at all. And so we will continue to self-publish as our way until, I mean, I don't even know if the answer is for larger companies to hear, traditional published companies to hear that message and then hire more Black authors or hire more women. I don't really know if that's the answer yet that will solve the issues that we have right now.
So this is all very much a work in progress, is what is the message I'm hearing from you guys. I do want to talk about the question of the child reader. Aristotle supposedly said, "Give me the child at 7, I can figure out what sort of adult they will be." Is there something about a particular age that makes them particularly receptive, impressionable? Maya talked about getting them at the board book age, but then I know that, Rebecca and Lucinda are doing it for the young adult audience, which is, high school, late middle school. Are there particular ages, do you think, where these messages are going to resonate for your readers?
Well, let me jump in. I think starting young is key, but my quote unquote day job these days is I do a podcast, called Book Club for Kids. And my sweet spot is 5th to 7th graders. God love 4th graders, but at 5th grade, they have a sense of the outside world and how they relate to the outside world. And I can distinctly remember being 11 years old. And if only someone treated me like I had half a brain in my head, I would have told them a magic, 101 things. And I find this with book club when I go into schools and we start talking about the book and we take that left turn that takes us down into conversations about what really matters to these kids. You get such wisdom and such insight. And to me, that is the group you really want to talk to. That's the group I really want to talk to, at least.
That's also an age when a lot of kids decide they're not readers, right? It's an age when we lose them.
Yep.
And so not only are they interesting and thoughtful and have a lot of sense of self, but they're at risk.
Exactly.
I think we hear a lot of 12-year-olds say, I'm not much of a reader.
That's what the numbers say. I think it's 70% of middle schoolers read at least 10 books a year, but by the time they get to high school, that number just falls off a cliff. And so if we don't catch them at that age and let them fall in love with books,
where does gender come into that? I assume it's more girls are readers than boys.
Nope.
Not necessarily.
Nope.
Okay.
No, it just depends on what they want to read. I mean, if you find something you love, you want to read about it. And let me just tell one quick story, which was we went into a school near Capitol Hill, 5 fifth grade boys literally climbing the walls. I mean, they literally were. The librarian had to go in and pluck them off the bookshelves and make them sit down on these beanbag chairs. And we did the crossover by Kwame Alexander, which is about brothers in basketball and verse. And the kids started talking about poetry and they talked about hoops. But then they started talking about their own lives and the relationships with their siblings. And then they broke into an a cappella song. I mean, you cannot tell me that these 5 fifth grade boys from Washington, D.C. don't love books. How can a book not? You know, I mean, it was magic. It was magic.
That's wonderful to hear.
I would say I think kids do consume stories, but they consume them in a lot of different formats. I mean, my oldest child loves to read traditional books. And she has over 627 books in her room because my youngest child went in and counted them. And I think they both were very pleased that they had done that exercise. But my two youngest kids, my two boys, they really like graphic novels. That's the way that the imagery brings them in. My youngest likes to listen to books on tape. They're very sophisticated even in their TV watching and TikTok and a lot of the other things they do. I think they're taking in stories through so many different formats. And books are always going to be incredibly important, but I think there's a wider world of them to sort of access those things that get them thinking and questioning and learning about their world.
That's a great point.
And also too, like when you talk about questioning their world, I think when you have younger readers, you have more opportunities to ask them the question in regards to a story of how did this make you feel? Or how did you feel when this character encountered this obstacle? Or when these two characters clashed in the way they interact with each other? And when you get a moment where a child, a student asks or responds with, well, I hadn't thought about it that way, or, oh, wow, this reminds me of the time when I, as opposed to an answer of, well, I don't want to engage with that, or I don't care. When you get those previous responses, that's a chance when a door has opened. And that is an opportunity. The more of those that arise earlier on, the more chances you have to make that connection through empathy and experience, to get more people understanding that, you know, the world is more than the room you grow up in, the first community you experience. There are those big questions you can ask about how we treat each other, how we get along, how we can help one another, and how we can build.
Those are all great points. I've got to say, as the father of 2 sons, I find that sometimes the most compelling narratives for them are in video games. Is that an issue for your core group readers? Is that the challenge we face, is how to compete against those really compelling narratives that come out of those games?
That's a fun question. I think that, you know, in terms of thinking of it as competition or not, you know, if there are more available mediums out there for storytelling, you know, kind of building on the points that many have raised here so far, if it's a story that gets someone hooked and can make them ask those questions and keep them interested, that's a big win. And so, you know, I think it's kind of been learning to, for many people over like several decades, has been learning to kind of share the field and kind of look at, well, you know, if you know, my young reader is not getting their stories through traditional novels, but through graphic novels or through gaming or through podcasts, you know, whatever that may be, I think that the more opportunities that we highlight and throw out there as like, hey, this is a great story, this is an acceptable way to do it, it's not a lesser story. I think everybody can win that way.
Yeah. In other words, we don't privilege one kind of story over another. They're all, yeah.
And we certainly don't privilege the stories the way we consume stories, right? I mean, I think we parents need to get out of our own way in a lot of things, but you know, just because your child is experiencing storytelling and language and the joy and wonder of English in a way that is not the way you experienced it does not make it lesser than.
That's a really great thing to keep in mind. Something I have to remind myself as a parent a lot. It's like my kids are not going to be readers in the same way that I was. So, I was going to ask, actually, Rebecca and Lucinda, I was going to ask you guys, was part of the reason, the mission behind your book, the fact that this story is not being adequately told in our schools? Are there gaps in how we're educating people about America's past, about the women's past?
Lucinda, you want to take that one?
Actually, I saw Courtney had her hand up and I didn't want to have us.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Courtney, I missed you. Go ahead.
No problem at all. I just wanted to add in that it's interesting. I think Rebecca spoke to this point about how children take in stories that's different than how our adults do. And I'd add that even though my book was written for a pre-K, K, or even a first grader, I've used that book with high school students. I've taught lessons about what their impression of Anacostia is, how we use the media to learn more about our communities and people who live in communities, and how to use statistics to understand our world. And of course, that was not necessarily intended on a pre-K, K or 1 level, but it works so well with 9th graders and 10th graders. And I couldn't have asked for a better. They weren't intimidated when they saw a picture book their way. It's anywhere from about 7 to 15 words on each page with larger than life illustrations created by Jerry Craft. But it was just opening enough to talk about these way more complex ideas and theories, but by using a children's book to soften the I guess the intro to the topics.
That's a great example, and it's accessible. It's about accessibility, right? Yeah, absolutely. Lucinda, you want to come back to the story of suffragettes, and why do we need to tell the story? Are people not getting that in a regular school format?
Well, I think when Beck and I were growing up, at least, we remember that the story of the suffrage movement got maybe about 2 sentences in the history book, if that, and it was always presented as sort of foregone conclusion, so they could then go on to all the more interesting stuff, which was wars and battlefields and and various different things, and you knew all of those dates. And at one point, we were realizing that I live in Virginia, and there was a time in Virginia where you were probably, you learned so much about Civil War history to the point where, there are people who can probably name more Civil War, not just Civil War generals, but Civil War horses than women suffragists. And we wanted to sort of both tell the history, but we wanted to say why it was important. It's not something that you should learn so that you can do well on your standards of learning, which they have in Virginia. And I know every state has their testing that they do. We wanted to say this is relevant and this is why, because each generation has things that they are going to come in and correct mistakes of their parents and all the things that we've done wrong. My kids tell me this all the time. But there is something to be learned and something valuable from history, if nothing else, but to see what were the mistakes they made? How did that happen? And specifically, did they do something right that maybe we should be paying attention to? So we really wanted to focus on writing something that was very fun, very conversational, but would maybe fill that gap. And as Becca says, not just for, I like what you said, Courtney, about it being available to all ages, because anything that is easy and enjoyable and memorable shouldn't be limited to kids. I frankly really appreciate stuff that I can take in quickly, and especially with visual imagery, I think makes a difference. Unfortunately, our book doesn't have a lot of the images I would have loved to have put in it, maybe a second edition sometime, but I think it does make a difference if you can tell that story in a way that 30 minutes later, people can remember those details, remember, the most important part of it. And what Glen was saying earlier about, having stories that reflect us and that really resonate to us in a way that doesn't seem stuffy and belonging to somebody else. I think that's important.
I want to jump.
Glen,
go ahead.
Hey, so I just wanted to piggyback off of the whole idea of inclusivity, right? In terms of the women's suffrage movement, or perhaps I'm not too familiar with your work, but just from face value, within the Crunchy Life series, there are just a ton of just historical truths in regards to the African American experience in America that are untold and lesser known than some of those benchmarks, right? Someone had mentioned the word dates, and what that immediately made me think of is how in social studies, I am a 5th grade teacher. This is, you know, what I do for a living, and humanities and social studies is my thing. But we have these benchmarks. I teach in Fairfax County. I used to teach in DC. I was in Southeast. The curriculum is the same everywhere you go right now. There's this larger argument that, you know, we need to start telling, you know, the story from what it is, as opposed to what we want to paint this picture in the minds of our children in terms of it being this PG-13 America, the great hero, right? America was the villain and continues to be in a lot of spaces, right? I love this country, but the truth is there are some terrible histories that have to be told, but we can do a better job in terms of the way that we're introducing that to kids, both Black, white, whatever you want to, everywhere, right? But the point that I'm trying to make briefly is that I happen to be the only Black teacher in my building, right, as an elementary teacher. And at the point of me transitioning from DC, where the majority of our children, almost 100% of our children were children of color, our staff, leadership, everyone was, you know, of African-American descent in 3 different spaces, Northeast, Southeast, and in up near Tacoma Park. But then to come over to Fairfax County, where I will probably be the only Black male teacher that a lot of these children will ever see. And not only that, but the literature that I put in front of them, you know, Mother to Son, the Langston Hughes poem that I used during the month of March, they're understanding that there is a struggle that the person that may not look like them has gone through. And that's not to say that they are oblivious to the struggle of people of color or minorities or what have you, or even women, you know, whatever the situation may be. But if they're not exposed to some of that history that will allow them to think and to be, you know, the word is empathetic, right? So as opposed to looking at a 30-year-old Black man that doesn't have a job and saying, oh, that dude is lazy. Instead, you can break down those layers as a very sophisticated 10-year-old and say, well, maybe, you know, he didn't benefit from certain situations or scenarios. And the same goes for every other, you know, group of people that may have been marginalized in just our culture and in our country in general. But the attempt for the Country Life series is really to share that, you know, when you learn about the Roaring 20s, what the heck was going on with people of color? They had the Harlem Renaissance, and that's just one example of how there's this, you know, there's this, there's just a disproportionate attempt at kind of, these are the great things that happen in our country, but these are some other great things that happen. And this will then paint a better picture that will kind of add more flavor and value to, you know, what it is that you know about the world. So I'm all about telling the whole story. It's what I do for PBS, you know, during my blogs and all of that, making sure kids, teachers, parents know that there may be, you know, one way to look at it, but there's also another side to it. You know, we have Central Park in New York, but at one point that was an African-American community that was destroyed intentionally, right? So tell those stories so that we can come together as a people to not make those same mistakes again.
That's a great point, and this is enough. I've been told we need to wrap this up, but first I want to hear from Kitty and whoever else wants to make a final comment. I don't want to shut any of this down. Kitty,
yeah, I just want to jump off of what Glen was saying, that, you know, there are so many stories that just aren't told, and I'm going in a different direction, which is the lack of civics education in elementary schools. And if we've learned anything after the last election, we need to train this next generation of public servants, of people who will actually vote, people who understand issues, people who will be willing to commit to serving our nation in various roles in the political realm. And I think that is my initial way to try to address that, is to introduce them to the excitement of Washington, D.C. But getting back to what the title of our panel is on the divisiveness, in my heart of hearts, I am hoping that this is a book for children, but it's also a book for Congress. You know, we get to see the petty disagreements and the childish behavior seen through the eyes of a 10-year-old, that perhaps they'll be able to reflect on their own behavior and look at their own behavior. And perhaps we'll actually see political change in my lifetime. I hope.
So we're modeling behavior for them. Maya, I was going to come to you because I love a global perspective on some of this stuff too, but please carry on.
Yeah, well, that's what I was just going to say. Brought history, we've brought civics. I believe the global perspective is absolutely critical, and that's what my children's books are about, is really showing how children live around the world. but also in a country that is made of immigrants with families that live overseas. That is a sort of, that is a connector, and it's an inclusion issue. And so we all need to think of ourselves not only as American citizens, but global citizens. And that starts early, from early childhood to global babies, to from 5 to 7-year-olds, like back to school, come out and play to be an artist, to children from Australia to Zimbabwe for 8-year-olds and above. And that inclusion piece is absolutely critical on a global scale, but also because we are a land of immigrants.
This has been wonderful. I wish we could keep going, but we're reaching the end of our time. I wanted to thank all of you, first of all, for sharing your time and for being part of creating this a richer, more complicated, more inclusive narrative, which is, I think, what our country, our future depends on in so many ways. So thank you all for coming out, and please buy their books, and please support local DMV authors and children's literature in general, and YA literature, I should add. Thank you all very much. And I'm sending this out back to Liz. Are you out there?
Here. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Take it away. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, that was a wonderful discussion. Thanks to our children and young adult authors. It was wonderful. I want to just remind everybody that many of the authors who appeared on the panel also have videos on our website. Many of their books can be purchased at each city. There are shop buttons next to their names on our website. And we have a few other children's authors featured on our website that we could not fit during our live event today. We have Allison McGill and Angela Kissel of Lola and Pear, which is a local publisher. And Teri Katasus Jennings is also featured on our website. They have some wonderful, very charming books that speak to the topic of our panel. We also are featuring 3 doctors who wrote a book called We Stand Together Just 6 Feet Apart to teach kids about the coronavirus pandemic. We have a little treat for you before our next panel. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan. We're going to run a video from another of our featured authors. Take it away, Dan.
Hi, my name is Varu Chilakamarri, and I'm the author of this cookbook, Indian Cuisine for the Busy Vegetarian. When I learned how to cook Indian food, I learned from my mom, who learned from her mother in India. And I found that the techniques to cooking Indian food were often really time-consuming, complicated, or they always required some ingredient that I didn't have on hand. There was always this tension between the old school, authentic way that my mom learned how to make Indian food and the reality of how much time I actually had on any given weekday to make these wonderful, flavorful dishes. So over the years, I learned to take shortcuts. I developed ways to simplify some of the dishes that I ate when I was growing up into something that I could really still enjoy as an adult after a long day of work, having a busy career and a family, but still being able to have Indian cuisine be part of my everyday life. Well, there'd be times when, my mom would say, you have to have fresh tomatoes to make a tomato dal. But it turns out, you can actually use canned tomatoes and it'll be just fine. Sometime I might want to make samosas for a group of friends over the weekend. And the thought of creating, a pastry dough and getting out the rolling pin to make the shell for the samosa was just so daunting. And it turns out, you can use flour tortillas. It's a little shortcut that I use and that I have in my book. For ways to, again, to just make Indian food part of everyday cooking when you don't have that much time. I think one of the reasons why we are all so drawn to food, beyond the fact that food is yummy, we need to eat it and we like to eat it, I think it's also because food connects us to life. It connects us to our friends, it connects us to the people that we're making it for, but also sometimes, an aroma or a certain flavor will take you back to a memory, to another piece of our lives. And food has that way of connecting us to those aspects. Sometimes food can connect you to the person who taught you how to make something. And that's exactly what happened to me in one of the things among many that I share in the book. I thought that it would be nice to actually read an excerpt from one of the personal essays in this book that really, I think, speaks to the connection that I see between food and other important things in our lives. And the essay is entitled Pudding, Porridges, and Generations of Love. It's an essay that I have in the dessert chapter of this book. I miss Bobo. I miss her too, responds my 4-year-old boy. We carry our laundry upstairs, walking by my mom's basement apartment, still dark almost a year later. As Marc climbs onto his seat at the kitchen counter, I ask him what he misses about my mom, who Marc nicknamed Bobo. I'm curious, how much can he remember about the grandmother who started living with us when he wasn't yet 2 and who was gone before he turned 4? She was diagnosed with terminal cancer when he was learning to speak in sentences. I remember her laughing with us when he exclaimed that he wanted a big pea of cake, all while her eyes carried a constant pool of water. Remembering my mother, Marc smiles widely, and I brace myself for one of those profound reflections that only a child can unwittingly render. He whispers, "When I came home from school, she would always give me a bar, and we didn't even tell you, Mommy, we kept it a secret." I know he's referring to the fruit and cereal bars that I usually didn't give him myself. They were so yummy, Mommy. I miss Bobo. At once, I felt a little let down that he remembered her for something so seemingly insignificant. But I guess when you're 3 years old, a pink foiled raspberry cereal bar delivered with a warm hug and a covert smile really is everything in the world. And why not? It's sustenance and personal validation, all in one. Some might call that love. It now makes sense to me why grandparents of all generations and cultures attempt to spoil their grandchildren one way or another. Our first memories of our loving elders are often on simple and pure terms. At age 4, like Marc, I probably would have just said, "I miss her breakfast porridge." My mom would make creamy rice porridges, puddings, halva, and other sweets. She always cooked the porridge on the stove with milk, not water, and she'd add a good helping of sugar or honey because she knew she was competing with those generic Cocoa Krispies in the cupboard. She even took the time to roast up nuts and raisins in butter in a separate pan until the raisins plumped up into glistening spheres, and then she'd quickly spoon the golden nuts and raisins onto the steaming cereal. At Marc's age, there's no way I would have been able to articulate that I was grateful for my mom getting up on a cold morning to make me breakfast while I snuggled in bed, or that I was thankful for how she'd always remembered to pour a little cold milk on my porridge so that I could dig in right away without burning my tongue, or all those other things, big and small, that a parent or loved one does to protect and care for you. But as my mom always watched expectantly as I took my first bite of anything she made, I think she knew what it meant when I looked up and simply said with a big grin, "Yummy!" And so I think I know what Marc means now, and I miss her too. If this story and personal essays like that really connect with you, or if you just want to find out how you can make Indian cooking at home when you only have a few minutes and you don't necessarily have a whole cupboard stocked full of spices, then I hope you'll check out my book, or also feel free to check out my website, www.busyvegetariankitchen.com, and you can check me out on Instagram as well for the latest events and cooking in my kitchen. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy this literary book festival.
Thank you, Varu. That was delightful. I'm just going to take a quick moment to announce our Instagram giveaway winners. We ran an Instagram drawing for 3 custom curated book bundles from Capitol Hill Books, one of our favorite indie bookstores. So the winner of third prize, which is a $25 bundle of books of your choosing, the winner gets to choose her genre and or author, and then the geniuses over at Capitol Hill Books will put together a mystery bundle for you. S. Augusto Cox, that is her Instagram handle. So our Instagram maven will direct message you with details. Second prize, a $50 bundle of books, goes to a woman whose handle is Books and Mags. Again, our Instagram maven will direct message you. And grand prize, $100 worth of books from Capitol Hill Books, goes to Mora the Explorer. So congratulations to our winners. You will be hearing from us soon about how to get your books. Tim?
Oh, thanks, Liz. We're going to jump into our next panel right now. It's going to be hosted by Christopher Chambers. I think you maybe see Chris over there. Chris is a professor of media studies and a novelist whose most recent book is Scavenger, a noir mystery. The panel is, of course, all topics great and small, tackling societal issues through narrative nonfiction. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris here, please.
Thank you. And let's just want to start out that all the authors today have videos on the site, and please check out the videos and check out their books. These are amazing, basically narratives that are looking at some of these what seem to be intractable problems in our society and globally. And these are 4 people who have decided to take these on with their own methodology and put their own stamp on this. And we're going to talk to them all today. Let me start with Tamara Lucas Copeland. She is a philanthropy expert and a consultant in all things institutional bias and racism and addressing these problems. She's a former president of the Washington Regional Association of Grant Makers. And her book today that we will be talking about, Daughters of the Dream, 8 Girls from Richmond Who Grew Up in the Civil Rights Era, is topical to say the least. Our next panelist is journalist Ariel Sabar, who has written for The Atlantic, New York Times, and other August outlets. He is the author of Veritas, a Harvard professor, con man, and the Gospel of Jesus' Wife. Let us just say that reality seems to be stranger than fiction in that title. We're going to get into that too. Our third panelist, excuse me, is Jennifer Howard, a former contributing editor and columnist for the Washington Post. Her current book is Clutter, an Untidy History. And full disclosure, Jennifer and I, along with Ted Cruz, Aaron Burr, one half of the Menendez brothers, and Dr. Jeffrey Fatal Vision McDonald, are all August graduates of Princeton University, along with Louis Bayard. So shout out there. And finally, we have economist and historian Marc Levinson. He's a former finance editor at The Economist, and he's the author of Outside the Box, How Globalism Changed from Moving Stuff to Spreading Ideas. So we're going to start then with you, Marc. Seeing that part of your title does fit into the theme, all things great and small, of this panel, this outside the box notion. And what I'd like each of you to do, starting with Marc, and then we're going to go to Tamara, Jennifer, and then Ariel, is if you could pinpoint or trace or explain something small or intimate or personal or some small idea or trend that you focused on first that helped you build your book into something that illuminates the problem that you're addressing, the injustice or the survival or the trends that might come to dominate our lives. So Marc, if you could basically take that first, and then we'll go to tomorrow.
Sure. Thank you very much, Chris. It's great to be here. And I would like to thank all of those who are attending for choosing the Capitol Hill Literary Festival rather than, say, Max Scherzer. I feel quite honored. My book is a brief history of globalization. It's a subject on which I think that there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of nonsense. And I decided to try to write this in a way that is accessible to a general reader. The notion going in was to keep this short, to keep it extremely non-technical, to keep it very conversational. And so it's got a great deal of anecdote and nothing at all technical in it. My beginning is actually a story which has turned out to be quite relevant in recent weeks when I tell the story of the launch of what was at the time far and away the largest container ship that had ever been built. This was meant to be carrying the world's trade far more cheaply than it had ever been carried before. So to promote globalization, and the assumption behind it was that world trade would continue to boom as it really had between 1987 and 2008. What happened instead was that world trade stopped growing as a share of the world's economy. This ship was followed by a whole lot of other giant ships which were running around the world half empty. There was no demand, and until the pandemic struck, and all of a sudden we couldn't spend money on services and had to spend it on goods last summer, there was this enormous overcapacity in shipping, ship lines going bust, supply chains becoming less reliable, and the beginnings of a retreat from globalization. So my story then takes us to why globalization has gone backwards in recent years. And it's a story that really has nothing to do with Donald Trump or with Brexit or with the other political events that we've seen in recent months, but is a phenomenon that can be traced back a decade to a lot of the problems that have occurred with international trade, due in part to ships like the one I write about, which were simply too big to do their job efficiently.
Unmute myself. I want to move, because we're going to come back to that, Marc, because we're going to tie everything together. I want to move to Tamara now. Tamara, your book is very different. It's much more personal, but you're going after a large problem, just as Marc is. What are your insights on how you tackled this issue? Choosing to go with this personal angle?
Well, thanks, Chris. So my book, which is here, it's called Daughters of the Dream. And it started out as a book about the friendship of 8 girls growing up in Richmond, Virginia in the late 1950s and early 60s. And we just thought it was remarkable that we had been friends for about 60 years, and we wanted to just capture that reality. And I became the person who was going to write the story. But as I started to write the story, I realized that so much of our lives were intertwined with the civil rights movement. And not that we were voices in that movement, because we were children. But what I tried to share in the story was the connection between the basics of our lives, of going to a segregated elementary school, but the pride we felt when the principal of that school called us all into the auditorium, and there was a big activity, and we were going to start by singing Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Negro National Anthem or the Black National Anthem. And just being in that environment. So I ended up, Chris, not writing a book that was solely about our friendship, but a book that chronicles some of the history of Richmond and the history of our country over all of our lives. So the book goes through the election of Donald Trump. And one of the things we realized was that whenever we got together, and we get together pretty regularly,
that there was always something that was either going to a museum that had an exhibit about a Black themed exhibit, or going to a restaurant, but that the history of Black America surrounded us, of course, and it was truly intertwined in our own history.
Thank you. Let's go to Jennifer next. And again, we're all going to come back to all these themes, so don't worry. So let's go to Jennifer next. And Jennifer, sorry, I had to put us all in the category with Ted Cruz and everything, but I couldn't resist.
You had to. It was a good opportunity. Yeah.
And one half of the Menendez brothers. You can't forget them.
True.
What
Well, it's
about
great.
you?
It's great to be. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so what about you? You heard Tamara, and you heard from Marc. I mean, what did you focus in on early that helped kind of grow this? I mean, was there some allegory at work or something?
No, like Tamara, my book Clutter really came out of a directly personal experience, and a very painful one, which I think a lot of people can probably relate to, which is that I had to clean 50 years worth of stuff out of my mother's house. She didn't die, she had a crisis, could no longer live on her own. And overnight it fell to me to have to figure out what to do with all this stuff. And she had a whole lot of stuff. I mean, it was basement to rafters packed. So this I came to the subject as a very personal family problem that I had to deal with. But as I started talking to people and hearing similar stories from other families about what I had thought was a situation really unique to my family, or at least very painfully and particularly personal, I began to realize that this was not just a struggle that my family was having, but that many of us in this contemporary society have. And that got me curious. So from that very personal experience, I branched out and started talking to people to find out where all this stuff had come from and why so many people like my mother and other friends and family members, they had kind of gotten trapped by this problem. So then that led me, one conversation led to another, and I just kind of kept expanding outward to look at the problem as a social one and a collective one.
Thank you. And then Ariel, you're going to bat cleanup because I love sports, stupid sports metaphors. So you bat cleanup to the intro. What about you? Was there something that you've kind of discovered or focused in on early that kind of grew this concept? Because I got to tell you, like I said, the reality seems to be stranger than fiction. Because when I saw the title to this book, I said, wait a minute, he's venturing over into our territory. I got to notify Louis Bayard. But Ariel, please take us through your book and your journey.
Yeah, I mean, it actually started, it was really just a chance assignment. I was a relatively new freelancer for Smithsonian Magazine. Back in 2012, I got a cold call from an editor there I had never worked with before, one of the top editors. He said, we've gotten this scoop. In a couple of weeks, a very famous Harvard professor of religion at their divinity school will be making a major announcement in Rome. She's discovered a tiny scrap of papyrus. It was literally, I mean, talk about small things. It was the size of a business card that contained 8 fragmentary lines of text, one of which was, Jesus said to them, my wife. And so, of course, this was going to be explosive. Of course, there's a hallowed tradition of the celibate Jesus. The all-male celibate priesthood is very much predicated on that idea, as well as sort of, Orthodox teachings about women's leadership, marriage, and sexuality within the church. And so this professor was going to make an announcement that would, there seemed to be historical discovery of a manuscript that would upend all of this teaching. So it was a little bit daunting, I had to have 2 weeks sort of get up to speed about all this stuff, go to Rome, go to Harvard, interview her. And, I was the only journalist in the room in Rome, literally in a room across from the Vatican when Professor Karen King announced this discovery. And, was there as a, straight down the middle, objective journalist trying to cover the story for a magazine. And right away in the room, when she announced it to colleagues, there was a lot of pushback. A lot of people in the room had a lot of questions about its authenticity. And one of the things that struck me really early on was the question of provenance. Where in the world did this tiny fragment of papyrus come from? Because as a journalist, sort of one of the things we're taught almost from day one, whether you went to journalism school or not, is that sources matter. That when a source wanders into a newsroom and gives you a sensational scoop, it's not enough simply to sort of vet the information that you're given. You also have to understand a little bit about the individual who's come into your newsroom. And you know, what kind of axe might they have to grind? Do they have a reputation for telling the truth? Do they have a reputation for integrity? And the professor declined to name this individual who had brought her the papyrus. She would only say that he was a complete stranger. And so from the very beginning, even in 2012, before I had launched on another much deeper investigation for the Atlantic magazine 4 years later, before I wrote the book, there was this question in my mind of provenance, of sourcing. Who was the individual, this anonymous person who even the professor hadn't heard of, who emails her cold one day and says, I've got this amazing papyrus and I want you to help translate it for me. And so that was the seed of what became a much larger investigation into provenance, into ownership, that would wind up unraveling the whole story.
Thank you. Again, I was jealous. I thought you were coming into our territory with a blockbuster novel, and I said, oh man, and then it's like, no, truth is always stranger than fiction. Thank you, Ariel. We're going to get back to that. I want to jump back to Marc, though. Marc, in putting together your book and researching it, given the discipline that you're in, both the economist, historian, former journalist, was there anything that surprised you or changed your mind or gave you a different look at a certain issue or a certain trend or a certain factor when you were putting this book together? Or was everything pretty much a straight line? I mean, were there any curves or curveballs? There's my sports metaphor again, that struck you and made you kind of sit back and go, oh, I'm gonna have to take a different direction here. So Marc, can you take us through that?
Sure. There were some areas in which I had not done much work before. I've done a lot of work in modern economic history. Part of my story here was to track, again, briefly and colorfully, the growth of international trade over time, because there are a lot of people who've said, globalization is nothing new. We've had that since the time of the pharaohs, right? And I actually went and got some of the available data, for example, on how much was carried back in the great days of a Renaissance Venice or of Portugal's East India trade. And you can compare that to what we see in terms of modern globalization. You can find that all of the annual trade of Venice in a single year is less than fits on a modern container ship, okay? That gives you a kind of different understanding of what's going on in the world. That yes, it was for the time a lot of commerce, but it's really nothing like what we've had in the modern world in terms of the massive flows of trade. So that's one example of how I did that. I'm very much trying to tell stories in writing a book like this. There are other people who can do a much better job than I of putting together charts and statistics and regression analyses and all the rest, and that's really not what I do. And so I'm looking for examples and looking for ways in which to make this accessible to someone without the technical knowledge. I got a huge compliment in a review of this book recently. It's a publication called the Journal of Economic Literature reviewed the book, a professional economists publication. And the comment in the review was, I really enjoyed this book. And that's not something you expect to see in an economic journal, but that's what I was trying to get to in here. And it takes a lot of work, as I think all of my fellow authors know, in coming up with the sorts of stories and anecdotes and relationships that make a book fun to read as well as interesting.
Just as a quick follow-up, wearing your historian hat, were you concerned at all about any pushback at anything you were talking about? I mean, initially, when you're talking about time of the pharaohs, there are monographs out there specifically dedicated to globalism 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, to the spread of tea around the world, or the spread of opium or the spread of fermented beverages. I mean, were you concerned about that, or was that a factor in your approach?
It's just something you have to deal with in the writing. A book like this has a million facts in it, and every single one of them is subject to challenge. And so even as you're trying to make it readable and enjoyable, you also have to go through it sentence by sentence and say, can this sentence stand on its own as an accurate sentence, or is somebody going to come in, pick it apart because there's something about it that's incorrect? Perhaps an incorrect understanding of the facts, perhaps simply an incorrect word choice. And that's very important in the writing process to make sure that you get the facts right without losing the readability.
And that would be true if you were trying to defend it against. There's a lot of people who have a very populist view of the word globalism. Was that in your mind, as you said when we did the introductions, was debunking that even subconsciously part of your approach, do you think?
No, but I'm accustomed to writing things that are going to be read by other people and critiqued. And so I do write carefully because I'm aware that if you're writing nonfiction and you get a couple of things wrong, you can really destroy the credibility of what you're doing. I also review other people's books for publications. And similarly, if I spot some errors in another book, it doesn't really make much of a difference how nicely written the book is. It may not be credible and I can't recommend it. So I pay a lot of attention to that.
Okay, let me go back to Tamara then. Tamara, you have again, this is we're talking about two giant problems in terms of bias, racism, and history. You have a totally different approach to this. I mean, was there anything that surprised you in your research? Was there anything that was difficult or painful? And I don't necessarily mean for you personally, but you're having to navigate 8 or 7 personalities, and you might have to vet some of that because some people might not remember stuff the same way. What was your approach to this? And were there any surprises?
Well, certainly. It's interesting that you've known people all of your life, but there's certainly parts of their lives that you don't know. You don't know. And so when I started the book, I interviewed each one of my friends, who this friendship group. So there was a conscious effort to tell their stories, but to tell their stories in their words, by not telling their stories the way I thought they had happened. So I certainly interviewed all of them and then sent them the sections of the book in which they were mentioned or referenced to make sure that I was telling the story correctly. So when I was telling the story of 8 people and only really knew intimately the story of one, the story of me. But there were still some surprises, Chris. I mean, as I was trying to tell the story and to integrate African-American history in Richmond and around the country with the story, that as I was doing the research, there were all kinds of things that I learned that I didn't know. And I think that that's true, that we don't have a complete sense of history in this country, that there are a lot of facts that particularly relate to the African-American community that aren't covered in our history classes in high school, junior high school, college, et cetera, that we don't learn. So I certainly learned a lot, and I hope others do as well.
Let me come at what I just spoke to Marc about from the opposite direction. Were you, you don't seem to be a person who's easily intimidated, so I'm not going to use that word, but were you thoughtful or aware of the possibility that people who are trained historians might try to go over, your narrative with a fine-tooth comb for whatever reason, be it friendly or hostile, because it could be both.
Perhaps it's naivete that I didn't think about that. I certainly put in the preface to the book that I acknowledged that I was not a historian, that I had, I thought carefully fact-checked everything in the book, and but I was telling a story, and I hope that that it was historically accurate. And I also wasn't. I was reporting facts, not doing a level of analysis. So I think that that also lent itself to a different lens that people used in reading it. I was not analyzing history.
Do you think, and I'm not trying to, push towards the grandiose here, but do you think that this kind of book, Daughters of the Dream and ones like it, will be looked at in the same way that marginalized people have had to rely on narratives, like the slave narratives, Box Brown's, or even Frederick Douglass's? I mean, do you look at this book as part of that kind of a genre? And if so, tell me, why would it be of value to trained historians?
I certainly do. And again, not to be grandiose about this little book, but I think that when you are learning about World War II and the Holocaust, that you can read a lot about the facts and the figures. But when you read the diary of Anne Frank, that the story has been humanized in a way that brings that reality to life. So I believe that telling the story of these 8 young girls in Richmond during the Civil Rights era first suggests that there wasn't the pathology in all African-American families that you often see and hear about. We were just middle-class kids growing up in Richmond. And so I do think that it gives a different lens on the story of the civil rights movement, and certainly the story of Richmond during that civil rights movement, than perhaps other stories do.
Do you think your book would be of value in the classroom? And I'm not talking about necessarily post-secondary college. I'm talking about little kids, primary and secondary. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I sure do. I mean, and it's interesting that in Richmond now that they have started a curriculum that's called Real Richmond, that's recognizing that the full story of Richmond has not been told and is not being taught in the school system. And they do use my book as one of the supplemental readings. So it certainly can. I think that when you're going to John Marshall High School, which is where I went to high school in Richmond, and when you're a student there, to read about someone else's experience there. And I tell the story about all of us going to the homecoming, and they would introduce the people who were celebrating their 50th high school reunion. And we would chuckle at each other and said, my God, can they still walk? Can they still see? And then we celebrated ours. And right. So, I think that it certainly gives a different level of reality to the experience, even for young people there to hear today.
Okay, great. Let me shift to Jennifer. Let me ask you not necessarily the same question about something that surprised you, but how did you navigate philosophically the origin story of this book, which is not when people go to their favorite indie bookstore like East City or something, and they see this book, they might tend to think that it's at first blush tongue-in-cheek. Some people might not, but it might be, just something like for me, your story did not trigger for me what I thought this book was going to be. It's like, because everybody's had to deal with this if they've had an ill parent or a parent who's passed on. But at first blush, clutter, an untidy history, there might be some anecdotes about, we're talking about the pharaohs, Nefertiti trying to clean out Ramesses' crap, from his other wives. I mean, there is an element that might say, well, this is tongue-in-cheek. I mean, what did you do, if you thought about that at all, to try to have this as kind of a guide for people without it getting too Martha Stewart-ish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, clutter is often presented to us as an organizational challenge. There are a lot of how-to books or Marie Kondo style books, which can be useful and interesting. I really had a very different need, a personal need to write the book, which was to explore why this was such a painful topic. And that did involve taking the risk to write about, frankly, some really painful family stuff that I had not really shared widely, except with some friends. And that is a risk. It's a risk that any nonfiction writer is going to take, especially, or has to consider taking, especially if there's a memoir component. And my book is not a memoir, but my angle, my way into the subject was very personal. So I had to share that with the reader, or else it would be disingenuous, kind of dishonest. And I also had a lot of, frankly, traumatic feelings that I wanted to process. And as a journalist, one thing I do, I ask questions and I talk to people to try to understand what I'm seeing. And to combine that with the personal experience that I was trying to understand was really an interesting and frankly kind of scary experience as a writer. I did talk to some family members, particularly my daughter, who is very close to my mother, and then said, I'm writing this book and I may say some things about Grammy that are going to be painful to read. How do you feel about that? And she said, well, if it helps other families not go through what our family went through, then it will be worth it. And I thought that was just such a lovely, gracious and true thing for her to say, that it made me feel like, okay, I'm not doing this to get back at my family, but to try to understand what happened and help other people maybe avoid some of the things that we went through. It would have been very different if I ever thought my mother was going to read it. It would have been much harder to write. She never will. She's alive, but she has dementia. She can't read anymore, so she doesn't know the book exists. But my father, actually, I talked to him. They're divorced, long divorced, but I talked to him a lot about it as well, even though he's not a central figure. And he also said kind of what my daughter had said, that, you know, you need to, this is an experience that you can share in a useful way. It doesn't have to be, you know, lurid or like a mommy dearest kind of thing, but this is something that's very real and so explore that, and that it'll be worth doing.
Yeah, because I mean, there's no, and I didn't mean to imply that there's any kind of bait and switch here. Because it's implicit when you look at the book and you know, if you go to the store or you look it up online. Do you think that that this will trigger people, not trigger in a bad way, but trigger people to think of stuff as every piece of stuff as not a piece of junk, but as a piece of somebody? Is that basically your aim there? And then if it's a piece of somebody, what do you do when you have all of these pieces of somebody and you have to do something with it?
Yeah, that's a real struggle and very difficult because there's so much emotion tied up in our things. Sometimes very pleasant, good emotion, like you look at something and you remember a place or a person associated with that thing. Sometimes very painful for whatever reason, like there's a crisis and you have to deal with all someone's stuff, and it really can feel like dismantling somebody's life, which is a scary and terrible thing to have to do. We all have so much. Well, most of us have so much stuff in this particular society, even at all income levels. I would not want us to spend all our time looking at every single thing we have and trying to make a decision about it. I think that's paralyzing for a lot of people. But just to think more holistically about how much we have, why we have it, what's worth keeping and what isn't, and to try to find a balance there. Are these things important to you because of who they represent? Are they useful to you? I'm not a minimalist. I think that's a very hard lifestyle to achieve. I don't disapprove of it, but you don't want to spend your whole life being a slave to your things. But you also don't want to go through or have your family go through the kinds of experiences that I and my family went through, where there's just a lot of unnecessary trauma involved in the collection of things. But I hope people will read the book and understand that this is not a personal failing necessarily. The personal responsibility is important, but there are a lot of social and cultural factors in this capitalist economy that drive us to accumulate and keep and buy more and more than we need. So there's some good and thoughtful, useful, I hope, questions to ask about our stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you were going to a hypothetical conclave or seminar on clutter and things, would you basically say that you're more of the emotional philosophical, the reality of clutter rather than the organizational part. Is that basically what we're talking about with your book?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely not, I mean, you have to find a system that works for you, whatever that is. But organization is really about managing emotions more than stuff. You know, how are you going to, how do you want to live your life? How are your things helping or getting in the way of that? So it's not really about the stuff. It's about the personal histories and feelings and experiences behind the stuff. That's I hope.
Real quick, have you gotten any feedback from people that this has really affected personally?
I have actually. I've heard a lot of stories, both when I was writing the book and just emails from readers saying that this really resonated because I had to go through something like this with my parent or relative, or I'm worried I'm going to have to do something like this with my own family, so I'm going to buy them a copy of your book and see if they can maybe take some action now.
Yeah.
And it's been that personal connection has been so satisfying as a writer, just to know that the book is finding some resonances with readers and maybe helping making them feel a bit better about their own situations.
Thank you. Ariel, let's go to you and talk about Veritas. Because I mean, this is utterly fascinating to me. How this, this wasn't a novel. Let me ask you, did you at some point, Ariel, turn into, muckraker, investigative reporter, Bob Woodward, of debunking the con? I mean, what did that was there a transformation there? Because at some point, when you were doing your research, it just seemed too good to be true that this story was, it's straight out of the Da Vinci Code. So Ariel, I mean, take us through your mindset here as a reporter, from when things really started to turn for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had started out as a newspaper reporter, many years ago before I left to write books and magazine articles, and had done a fair bit of investigative journalism as a daily journalist. But as a daily journalist, you don't have a ton of time to turn things around. I think with this story, when I initially got the assignment from Smithsonian Magazine in 2012, I viewed it as a magazine feature story. I needed to tell a compelling story with compelling characters about something that was deeply important. If you were a person of faith, a person of Christian faith, if you were Roman Catholic, particularly. But I wanted to just tell an interesting story with compelling characters. So I think it started out as a feature writing exercise, and then after that initial story was published in Smithsonian, I usually, for any big story I write, I usually set up Google alerts, to find out when the subjects of the story or the issues of the story appear again in the news. And 3 years later, I noticed that scholars were still debating the authenticity of this tiny papyrus fragment. And at that point, sort of the investigative gears started turning, because the question that had sort of gnawed at me from the very start was the question, as I mentioned earlier, of provenance, of where did this artifact that really had the power to upend the history of early Christianity, where did it come from? And that remained an unanswered question. Scholars are really good at doing, working in labs, working in libraries, working with a written word. I think one thing, a skill set that journalists can bring is, are the kinds of things that most of us do every day, which is making phone calls, making cold calls, knocking on people's doors unannounced, politely, of course. And if they tell you to go away, you go away. But, and I did that in this case. I started thinking, how can we figure out who the owner of this papyrus is? And then what can we find out about him? And that involved everything from working in the Library of Congress with 60-year-old phone books from small towns in Bavaria and Germany to try to track the movements of the family that had owned this papyrus, to knocking on doors everywhere from small town Montana to Berlin, Germany, to try to bring together, to try to understand where this papyrus came from. So yes, at some point, the feature writing turned into investigative reporting.
Let me, I'm getting the high sign that we got to wrap up a little bit, but let me just ask you just one question really quick. When you have these caper kind of things that happen, are you sensitive that you don't want to make a folk hero out of the con man and a fool out of the professor? Is that something that you're sensitive to?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all good writing, whether it's in journalism, or whether it's in fiction, or whether it's for television, portrays people as three-dimensional human beings. That they're flawed. They're neither all good nor all bad, and then you can see yourself both in the sort of the hero and the villain, if you will. But they're parts of our own humanity, sort of there, but for the grace of God go I, in both the con man and the professor. And these are fundamentally human stories. And the last thing I wanted to do as a writer was to try to, make this too easy for people to get. I wanted people to wrestle with the moral questions at the very center of the story. And those are moral questions that deal with the line between reason and faith, with the nature of truth. I mean, we're at a moment now where the very idea of verifiable facts is under attack. And so I think at the very, very center of this book, I mean, and you see it in the title Veritas, which is, of course, the 400-year-old motto of Harvard University, which initially stood for the idea of religious truth or Jesus's truth. But then in post-Enlightenment came to stand for the idea of, empirical truth. And,
right.
And I think what the book gets at fundamentally is the ways in which people approach the search for truth, using different tools and different standards, whether it's people of faith for whom one takes things for granted without having evidence. That's what faith is. To journalists and scientists who believe that you can go out there and verify things that are out there in the world. To, I think, the kind of scholar that I think Karen King at Harvard was, or postmodern scholar, for whom objective reality doesn't exist.
Right.
We're all sort of making it up as we go along. And it's the person who has the biggest megaphone, who can tell and sell the best story, who gets to tell, sort of define what the truth is. So you have these competing definitions of truth and morality that all play out in a single story.
Okay, well, let's use our last megaphones, everybody, starting with Marc. Just tell us what you're working on now, and if it's an elaboration of the book that you're presenting today. So, Marc, and then Tamara, Jennifer, and then back to Ariel. So Marc, kick it off, just real quick. What are you working on now, and is it an elaboration, and what can we look for you from the future?
I've been writing a lot of articles. I haven't actually started yet on a new book project. One of the things that I'm thinking a lot about is that, to Ariel's point, there's really a change in the way people read and in the way people think about books. And that's, I think, particularly true for nonfiction. This struck me a couple of years ago when I published a different book, and I got complaints about how many endnotes the book had. The endnotes were at the back. You didn't have to read them. If you didn't want to read the endnotes, you didn't read the endnotes. But enough had changed that instead of being pleased that there was so much documentation in the back of the book, some readers were intimidated by the fact that there was so much documentation. And that sort of brought home to me that you still want the objective truth, if you can, to Ariel's point, but that you have to have different ways of conveying things as the audience wants to receive things in different ways, and that's a challenge.
Tamara, what can we look for briefly from you in the future?
Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking about the invisibility of structural racism. Not the bad behavior of individual people, but the way in which the government has embedded policies and practices that advantage one group of people over another group of people. And I've been writing about it. So I do a monthly blog that tells the truth from my vantage point, and it's called daughtersofthedream.org. And so I will continue to do that, to try to elevate some of the realities about race and racism, particularly structural racism, that I think often go unseen and unaddressed.
Wonderful. We definitely would love to follow that blog through and the book. Everybody, go out and buy their books, please. Now let's go to Jennifer, and then we'll finish up with Ariel, and then we'll say goodbye to this panel. Jennifer, what are you working on now? What can we look for you in the future?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about not what we get rid of, which was the subject of clutter, but what we save as individuals, as families, as a society. Thinking about archives and museums and kind of who controls what gets preserved and how. And of course, in this digital age, there's so many different kinds of things to save, and a lot of ephemeral things, protest literature and all sorts of stuff. So I don't know quite where that's going yet, but I'm doing some writing in that general area because I think it's a really fertile and important area. Who gets to tell the stories and how we save and share those stories. It's just interesting to me.
Great, thank you so much, and I'll see you at reunions. Ariel, let's finish up with you, and then we'll say goodbye to this panel. Ariel, what can we look forward to from you, and is it an elaboration on stuff that you're already working on?
Well, I definitely continue to be fascinated by stories about the intersection between the ancient world and the modern one. I think they still speak to each other in really fascinating ways. And so at the moment, I'm working on another feature story for the Atlantic magazine. Although if I would probably deeply upset my editors if I said too much about it. But it is very much, it is very much in this sort of wheelhouse of stories about the intersection of the ancient and the modern worlds.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Marc Levinson, Ariel Sabar, Jennifer Howard, and Tamara Lucas Copeland. This has been an amazing panel, informational, good stuff on craft and dealing with the subject matters that you dealt with through your craft. So I'm just going to say goodbye. Again, I'm Chris Chambers. I'm the author of Scavenger, which is a DC noir mystery. And I'm turning this over to you, Liz, and everybody from the Literary Hill Bookfest. Thank you. It was an honor to serve you and to serve the panel.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, panelists. That was really a stimulating discussion. Thanks so much. Before we move to our poetry open mic, we have a surprise special guest, a friend of the Bookfest, Elizabeth. She performed for us last year. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz.
Great to see you. Thanks for stepping in at the last minute. It's a nice segue into our poetry.
Sure, my pleasure. I've lost sound. I can't hear anything.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
You can hear me? Oh, okay, good. I'd like to be able to hear you until I don't need to hear you anymore.
We can hear you fine. We can hear you and see you.
Oh, would you like me to just launch in?
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. All right. I'll just get started. When I'm not playing solitaire, I take a book down from the shelf, and what with programs on the air, I keep pretty much to myself. Miss the Saturday dance, heard they crowded the floor, couldn't bear it without you, don't get around much anymore. Thought I'd visit the club, got as far as the door, they'd have asked me about you, don't get around much anymore. Darling, I guess my mind's more at ease, but nevertheless, why stir up memories? Been invited on days might have gone but but what for? Awfully different without you. Don't get around much anymore. Ba-da-ba-da-dum. Do-ba-doo-doo-doo-doo. Da-da-ba-dee-doo-dee-da. Ba-ba-da-da-da-dum. Do-ba-doo-dee-da. Do-da-doo-doo-dee-da. Ba-doo-ba-dee-boo-da. Darling, I guess my mind's more at ease, but nevertheless, why stir up memories then invited on days? Might have gone, but what for? Awfully different without you. Don't get around much anymore. Oh, it's different without you. Don't get around much anymore. Oh, yeah. Huh.
Liz, thank you. That was fabulous. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And just for the moment, we appreciate it.
Now I just want you to play the YouTube video because you get to try that many, many times, and you know nobody can see your nervous mistakes. Anyway, thanks very much, Liz.
Thank you, Liz.
Have fun.
Okay, I think Tim's going to announce our next segment.
So we're in the final stretch here, but we always kind of save some of the most interesting stuff for the very end. Before I turn it over to Jonathan, I want to put one last plug in for our website, literaryhellbookfest.com. Please check it out. We've seen a lot of great interviews, discussion, panel discussions, videos from a lot of our authors here on the Hill. But that is not the sum total of everything that we have. We have a lot more videos on that website from other authors, some excellent ones that we just don't have enough time and space for on a 3 and going into 4-hour presentation. So please check them out. And of course, once again, if you saw ones that intrigued you, and I certainly did in the last panel, that you wish to purchase, there are links to eCity Books. You can go right to the author and link to it and buy it from a local bookstore, eCity Books, and with a local author. So. But without further ado, not from Tunklew's Tavern, but from apparently his own house, we're going to turn it over to Jonathan Lewis here, who's going to have a metaphysical patio for Poetry on the Patio today. Jonathan?
Thanks, Tim. Can everyone hear me? Great. Well, welcome to Poetry on the Patio. I'm your host, Jonathan Lewis. And even though it's a beautiful day outside, thank you all for joining us. And in fact, maybe we are all outside. Maybe we're all right now just sitting on the patio of Tunklew's Tavern, eating good food. Just imagine people drinking iced tea, beer, people walking in off the street, you know, they don't know what's going on, but they hear some poetry and they think, I need to be there. So today, welcome. This is Poetry on the Patio. We have some amazing poets lined up for you. 10 great poets, followed by our special treat, our first ever crowdsourced poem. Our first poet today is Serena Augusto Cox. Serena is a Suffolk University alum and was one of the first featured readers of the diverse Gaithersburg Readers Series. Poems can be read in the Magnolia Review, McQueen's Quinterly, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, Dime Show Review, Dissonance Magazine, Mother's Always Right, Virgin, and elsewhere. Work appears in This Is What America Looks Like anthology, Mom Egg Review's Pandemic Parenting issue, the Plague Papers digital anthology, H.L. Hicks's Made Priceless, Love is Love, an anthology for LGBTQIA+ teens, and Midge Raymond's everyday book marketing. She operates the book review blog, Savvy Verse and Wit, and Poetic Book Tours. Find her on Twitter at Poetic Book Tours. Please welcome Serena.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the Literary Hill Bookfest, Poets on the Patio. I'm happy to be here. The first poem I'm going to read is called Schoolyard Games, and it was published in Virgin. 1. Huddled, still too many of us for the old oak to hide. We wait, silent. Tap, tap our shoulders, giggles erupt. 2. Crouched under the desk, knees up, heads down. We have to remember, be still, be quiet. Cover our faces, shades drawn. 3. Dashed. We're a scatter of birds, looking for home base, running fast, evading capture. Freeze when touched. Now we're living statues. 4. In schoolyard games where the criminals are our own and pop guns shoot real lead, tiny chests heave until our bodies lie still, outlined in crimson. And the second poem I'm going to read is new. It's called When You Want to Stay. Plug my wound, gauze sops blood, tug my body, electric current to my chest. Tether my soul, soft hand to my heart, draw my mind, your words call. Catch my breath, breathe into my lungs. Wisp of me leaves, lips warm with you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Serena. And there we are. Now we are standing outside of Tunnicliff's Tavern. Our next wonderful poet is June Song. June is a native of Los Angeles who lived in Washington, D.C. when he was attending law school. He is a lawyer by day and writes by night. He has been published in the Berkeley Poetry Review, Soft Blow, and Splinter Literary Journal, and is currently working on a new print magazine, Angelus Quarterly. Please welcome June.
Hey everyone, how are you? Thank you so much for having me here. Greetings from beautiful Hollywood, California. I am delighted to be sharing 2 of my poems with you, and thank you very much for all the organizers as well as my dear friend Jonathan for the invitation. The first poem is called Passing. There are crisscrossed lines in pale pink that mark out hard-earned parcels on your skin, the seams of your muscles. What else could ever seem as frail as your eyes or that face in which I see the early plans of me built up with pain and memory, slow-moving tubes, brand new stitches? Should I take comfort in the fact that towns arise and cities fall, that this will happen to us all? How much I wish to take you back to a place where you were younger, to pictures where your eyes were clear, before the lines and crack appeared, and before you were a father. The next poem is called Memories. I can still remember how cold the sap was in those apples. It was autumning into winter, snow on the ground and the leaves, and remember thinking the juice was the blood of a wood nymph and telling you so. No, I can hear you say, it's sugar and water. We agreed finally it was liquid sun. Were there mittens? My fingers burned as brilliantly as your skin atop Black Mountain. I remember seeing you strip down in your quest to free the line, which I thought represented man's struggle to understand his place, and you simply thought was a rock to climb. Then again, now I can't recall the skies, if they are peregrine, infinite gray birds in flight, nor our words that once stood clear as a peak. I remember our casual greed reaching up and pulling off the endless orbs of fruit just because we were there and we could, scattering them like grains of sand. No, they were not like grains of sand, but numbered, limited things. And I can't remember now whether the juice was liquid sun or whether you made it to the top, because we were never there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, June. Also, this weekend is June's birthday, so please wish everyone please wish June a happy virtual birthday. Our next great poet is Tori Collins. Tori is a native Chicagoan who lives and works in DC. Currently an unpublished writer, she hopes to self-publish her work in the very near future, and she is also working on a new podcast, I'm Not Telling Stories. Her poem, From Pandemic to Protest, was written, quote, as COVID-19 and the protest defending Black lives after George Floyd's murder intersected, causing our community to take a closer look at racial inequities. She has performed it at a reading at Busboys and Poets, and also made a video that appears on the Hill Rag website. Tori also recently won the Words Matter poetry contest hosted by Ward 6 Democrats for her poem, The State of My Statehood. Please welcome Tori.
Thank you guys for having me today. I am honored to be here. So the first poem I'm going to read is actually From Pandemic to Protest that was published in the Hill Rag. And the second poem is something that I wrote just recently. I'm currently in Long Beach, California, just hanging out and working here just to get a change of venue from being in the district. So I hope you guys enjoy. From Pandemic to Protest. Black lives are lost and we march, counting the cost amidst a pandemic. Du Bois calculated the cost of liberty, and the receipts from Black lives confirm. Repression, suppression, oppression still cost more. Images of grief disrupts our peace that surpasses all understanding, and we still cannot comprehend. Thus, we ask why. Why does anyone have to die? But the question morphs into, why does anyone have to die like this, alone, a knee to a neck, intubated, socially distanced, shot in cold blood, without answers and without regrets. Cardiac arrested, asphyxiated, no charges, no convictions, from drive-by testings to randomly racially profiled traffic stops, no mask, uncovered mouths, covered eyes. From drive-by testings to randomly racially profiled traffic stops, no mask, uncovered mouths, covered eyes. Bird watching for 5 in Central Park can lead to death. Death, 'tis the great equalizer. No matter how good or bad your life, how wealthy or poor your life, how old or young your life, death will come. You've checked all the boxes to be counted. Socioeconomic status, race, zip code. These may extend your life, but death still comes. America, the land of retaliation, cancel culture, and the land of hiding in plain sight. Still no vaccination in sight. We continue to fight. We fight for founding fathers' freedom. We fight for equity and health that has nothing and everything to do with wealth. We fight for lives that continue to breathe, for lives that lost the ability to breathe, for lives that cried, I can't breathe. We fight or else the protest becomes the pandemic. Again, this poem was written at the early stages of the pandemic, and a lot has changed since that poem was written. And so the next poem embodies somewhat of the feelings that we have now since last year. And so the name of this poem, the next poem is Closer to the Sky. Now I can see my life with new eyes, leaving the east for the west, bringing me closer to the sky. Close enough to feel cosmic drops from April meteor showers, but not far enough away from the vigorous winds of change that must remain. Close enough to feel the wind from the full wing spread of a Cooper's hawk, and like birds of prey, we attempt to touch the sky each day, edging closer to our dreams, facing sunsets through our reflections in two-way mirrors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tori. And we might hear a couple of those lines again a little later in our crowdsourced poem. Also, I love that there's this intersection of California and DC today. This is really great. And I'm actually from California too, so this is perfect. Our next great poet is Jonah Coulson. Jonah's debut poetry collection, Said Through Glass, won the Gene Feldman Poetry Prize from the Washington Writers Publishing House. He received his BA in English and Spanish from Goucher College and a Master's of Fine Arts degree from American University. His poems have appeared in the Southern Review, Plowshares, Subtropics, the Massachusetts Review, and elsewhere. His interviews and translations can be seen in the Writer's Chronicle, Prairie Schooner, and Tupelo Quarterly. He teaches at Montgomery College in Maryland and lives in DuPont Circle. Please welcome Jonah Coulson.
I don't think Jonah's actually here.
All right, moving on. Hopefully he can join us at a later point in the reading. Our next poet is Marc Dawson. Marc Dawson's poems have been published in a letterpress chapbook titled Solitary Conversations, as well as in the North American Review, the Colorado Review, Willow Springs, Flyway, Nimrod, the Antioch Review, and Think Journal, where he was the featured poet. He edited the Black Warrior Review at the University of Alabama, and as a student, won an Academy of American Poets Prize. A native of Tennessee, he has lived on Capitol Hill for 20 years. His poem titled The Bright Hues of the Sistine Chapel was first published in the Antioch Review and subsequently appeared in the Poetic Hill in the October 2020 issue of the Hill Rag. Please welcome Marc.
Thanks, Jonathan and Liz and Caroline and all of the rest of you making this happen. I appreciate the invitation as well. The first poem I'll read is called Special Permission. It appeared in the online literary magazine One. If you haven't seen that, I encourage all of you to look at that. I think you would enjoy sending poems to that fine site. And you just send one poem at a time. That's the name. But anyway, here's the poem, Special Permission. It's 10 p.m. I love this hour. I really do. To bed? No, I'm too awake for that. But yes, we are in double digits now. Right now is the last moment I may embark on some original plan and fold it neatly done before midnight. The hour when the earth's curvature divides my thoughts into half moons and visions not my own become my own, like fish bones in the throat. But glorious 10 p.m. Only those like us with special permission venture out of doors. Someone smoking a last cigarette stands still at the apex of her reaching streetlight shadow, a heroic sentinel. And me, I carry trash to a street side basket. I turn and see that clover has formed a river in green grass. I have to think of myself thinking up a clever thought before I wonder if a buried sewage line has broken. I do not want to greet the happy couple approaching as smoothly as skaters on ice. It's 10 p.m. Under its spell, I make my way back across the grassy expanse to where grass ends and pause to gaze at the clover Milky Way. Second poem is I chose something with a different style. I've been reading A.E. Housman again, working with rhyme and so forth. Sort of dedicate this poem to my cousin who has two new cats, Vicky, and my friend Willie James King, a very fine poet in Alabama, who's brave enough to have 3 cats. So this poem is Song for a Cat. She'd better be in heaven, or what's a heaven for? That gal with husbands 6, 7 shall be a maid once more. The sound we knew as crying was seed for something new. She'll have eternity for trying, 10,000 words for mew. Each creature there will climb one step up nature's scale, and granted angel speech sublime, will use it without fail to say what every species thought. In words or not, it's love we sought. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Marc. I hope somewhere in someone's living room, a cat was listening to that poem. Our next great poet is P.S. Perkins. P.S. Perkins is a DC author, poet, performing artist, theatrical consultant, and entrepreneur who is, she says, quote, passionate about word power. She serves as a human communication and performing arts / edutainment consultant through her firm, the Human Communication Institute, and has formed and directed several oral interpretation / poetry / prose arts performing troupes and programs at various schools and communities throughout the country. She is board chair of Poets on the Green Line. She also coordinates the Poetic Voice Corner that appears in Southwest Voice, the People's Paper, for which she invites submissions at psp@hci-global.com. Please welcome P.S. Perkins.
Good day. Thank you for having me. The first piece that I'm going to do is one that was actually published in the Hill Rag. And like Tori talked about, kind of early pandemic. So I want to make a note about this particular piece. It's called Making Eye Contact. And I am asking you to listen to the word I because I'm using it as a homonym. And for those of us that know homonyms, we know that it means that you're saying the word twice, pretty much with the same pronunciation. So eye contact. So I'm using I and I. All right. So this is called Making Eye Contact. There is nothing but my eyes left to see, covered head to toe in my medicinal burqa. Is this what she feels like? Protected, guarded, conspicuous, only revealing the seeing part of me? So now I only use my eye to connect, eyeing others, eyeing me from a distance, 6 feet or more, searching to know, are you death approaching my door? Should I run? Should I be scared? As we eye each other, revealing the dread of walking into each other's space, avoiding connections of face to face, listening for a cough, dreading a sneeze, cover your mouth, won't you please? Avoiding human contact that could bring me to my knees. But still, I walk silently through the lonely streets, seeking eye contact, where I can greet with a wave or a nod, some recognition of my being. Because the last thing I want to do, the very last thing I want to do is return home to isolation where there is no recognition of who I be. So I wander the neighborhood, hoping, wanting, needing to make eye contact. The next piece that I would like to do is different. Obviously, a piece that is somewhat of a victorious piece, and I'm working to pull it up right now. So give me a moment. And that piece focuses on particularly the victory of something that has happened in our recent history. Give me just one moment while I try to get back to where I was. There we go. Almost. And I think most of us will recognize why I chose this particular piece. It's called Voracious Purpose. Voracious Purpose, but another way of saying it is VP. Awakened by the realization of dreams, hidden in the shadows of hope, the new beginning of a now day, long ago seen but left to linger in languishing legacies, year after year, decade after decade, advancing in the rear from fields of labor, wards of illness, kitchens of heat, assembly lines of produce with bruised hands and feet. But the dream didn't die as she carried the load of a burdened pride, cast down, sex abused, beaten and silenced, lifting hands upward on bended knee, refusing defeat while taking to the streets, together with brother, towing children needing mother, never forgetting the history of answered prayers, passing down resilience, born to be brave. So giving, she gave and gave and gave until victory shone through, awakening at the break of darkness before the dawn, a true dawn, a finally dawn. The voice of womanhood shouting, free at last, free at last. She won, she won, she won. Thank you.
Thank you, P.S. Perkins. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Our next poet is Chris Haley. Chris Haley is a poet and author who has written 2 award-winning scripts, The Studio, which focused on the plight of the homeless, and The Reconciliation Walk for Slavery and Penitence, which helped win the Maryland Tourism Council Global Marketing Award for the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Foundation. He is the author of 2 books of poetry, Obsessions and Until the Right One Comes Along, as well as a radio play, The Courtship of Joe and Eddie, and numerous letters, speeches, and poems that have appeared in a variety of publications. He has also written, produced, and directed 2 short films that appeared in 2005 at the Greenbelt Utopia Film and Video Festival and the Annapolis Film Festival. Please welcome Chris Haley.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you, Literary Hill Book Fest. These are 2 poems from my book, Until the Right One Comes Along, which is out now on Amazon. The first one is called Cupid's Advice. Why do you keep writing love songs? Why do you still obsess on the yes and no's of romantic woes stem from hearts that cause the mess? I tell you, stop your sweating. Easy come, easy go is the way. There are a billion people running around this earth, yet you cry over one lost yesterday? People, get a clue. It's a game. The Matrix plugged you in. If it's not Trinity or Neo, it's the X's and the Yo's. Gotta start these dramas again. What I'm trying to say, people, is stop worrying. Whether the world blows tomorrow, next week, or a zillion and 8, you will always find love, for better or worse. It is your blessing, and it is your curse. The only thing unknown, like my arrows when windblown, is that for love, you can't rehearse. Next poem is Hold Your Hand to My Heart. Hold your hand to my heart and feel it beating. Sense my blood running through to touch your fingertips. Begging you to linger, read my eyes and my lips, praying that you'll stay. Hold your hand to my heart, sense our skin at ease. My pores sweat glue to hold you fast. Smile politely, sweetly say, it can't be this way. Hold your hand to my heart, kiss and embrace me. With warm breath whisper, your ex and you are one again. In 25 days you'll leave, you'll rejoin him. Hug me tight as disappointment melts my soul. Hold your hand to my heart, say goodbye. Comfort me with wide eyes, seeing my regret and knowing there's nothing left to say. Hold your hand to my heart. Don't pull it away. Don't go, don't go. But if you must, shield my sight, mute my senses. I'll only remember when you stood there, holding your hand to my heart, this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was really powerful. Our next poet is Keith David Parsons. Keith is a native of West Virginia, USA, living in Washington, D.C., and less conflicted about it than you might think. He believes a poem without a message is like a big hole without spikes at the bottom. Why would you dig it? Parsons is a member of the DC Poetry Collective, which recently published its first anthology of poems, Inkblots, Volume 1, on Twitter at Christophanes and Instagram at Keith David Parsons. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Keith.
Thank you, thank you. I am very delighted to be here, and thank you very much, Jonathan. I will be reading 3 poems, 2 short ones and 1 that is a hair longer. This first one is coming out in Inkblots Volume 2, which does not yet have an official release date, but it'll be next month probably. Breathtaking. The tallest Gothic cathedral fell twice in construction. Its choir collapsed, that place to sing. The tender arches could not hold. Forces like wind and gravity, absent their effects, can be invisible, even deniable, but still as implacable as a blue knee on a black neck. Second poem. Valentine. Mid-March 2021, a little note dropped in my inbox. A little late, I thought. Congratulate, it said with corporate glee, George Valentine on this, his latest work anniversary. So here's to you, George. 1 year gone, first victim of Corona known by me. And third poem is also coming out in Inkblots Volume 2, and you can see a video of this on the Literary Hill Bookfest website. Mistake. It has been a month and a day since you broke the polite fence, smashed the insistent windows, and raped the US Capitol. Your casual rebellion chanting an alphabet from animal hides to zip-tie cuffs to put a bullet in Nancy's brain to stop her squirming. Now a 6-mile fortress crowns Capitol Hill, trenches of fences surround streets, while the dozen guardsmen every block sling full stock automatic assault rifles like talismans around their necks, warding off that freedom you wanted to impose at the point of a spear. You tell yourself this too will pass. Someday the fence will be slightly smaller and wrought iron with pretty finials, a plaque to commemorate this moment. And when a wide-eyed child of a better time asks, you will wanly smile, look down, away, and say, it was a mistake. Or perhaps I didn't approve of that, and yet you were there. You were there. Father, you were there, but left before the smashing. Uncle, you were there, but only on Facebook, meme-poning the Clintons and snarking Biden's speech gaffes. High school friends, you were there, pretending it was okay that your congressmen keep cuffing my city, ripping away my vote each day, building Fort Freedom on the Hill after my MPD saved our democracy from your dumbassery, yet you have the temerity to mouth mistakes were made? It was a mistake when the founders kept slaves, compromising 3/5 of the fabric of our country. It was a mistake to be proud of Proud Boys, to wax on about heritage, not hate, when the heritage was treason. George Floyd's esophageal collapse was a mistake, longer than 2 commercial breaks. But let's be frank, mistake would mean you didn't mean it when you covered for a madman who sicked a mad mob to soothe his peak, when you nattered about unity to duck justice, would mean Washington accidentally kept his slaves his whole life. And of course, you did it as purposefully as that crowd quenched Officer Sicknick's flame with a fire extinguisher. None of the horror show you perpetrated was a mistake. The only mistake would be letting you get away with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. That was also very powerful. Our next poet is L.B. Sedlacek. L.B. Sedlacek's latest poetry books are The Poet Next Door, The Architect of French Fries, and Words and Bones. Her short story collection, Four Thieves of Vinegar and Other Short Stories, is available from Alien Buddha Press. Her poem, Breakfast at Pete's, was published in the November 2020 Hill Rag. In the commentary, she noted that she's been eating at Pete's for so long that she can't remember when she first started going there. And it was, quote, probably after Cheryl's Bakery closed around the corner years ago. She lived with her uncle in his row house on East Capitol Street for many years. And even though she moved out some time ago, they still go to Pete's for breakfast whenever she visits him, and sometimes lunch too on the same day. Please welcome L.B. Sedlacek.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I thought I would read a poem from one of my newer poetry books. It's called Simultaneous Submission. So if you're a writer, you hear that term a lot. But this particular poem is one about rain. I happen to love water. Some people don't like the rain, but I do like it. It's called The Secret of Rain. Unlike the doctor's office with the soothing aquarium of dark blue waters, fish of many colors, each drop is a mirror into your day, not simply mud or wet. How wet the rain is something often said. How magnifying the drops, a tiny picture in each one. How easily the moisture moves the clouds, shifting the usual blues into white and purple and light pink, a delicate shift of worlds and words. How lucky to actually see it, how the world moves with or without water. And the next poem I thought I would read is actually about Pete's. This was published in the Hill Rag, and I've probably been going there as long as I've been going to Tunnicliffs to eat. So it's an important place to us. And especially since last year, so many restaurants were hurt so badly in the pandemic. But this one is called Back to Pete's. We go again to the diner up on the hill, right off the avenue, the little restaurant with a few booths, a few tables, and a counter with stools. Breakfast and lunch specials all day long. We eat eggs, oatmeal, bagels, and cream cheese, pancakes, cereal, double I, and waffles, home fries and grits, coffee, soft drinks. But this time it's lunchtime, and we have pumpkin soup with ginger, grilled cheese, burgers, chicken sandwiches, and fries, water, coffee, sodas. All of it fixed fresh right off the griddle, right off the grill, fixed almost as fast as we order. Everyone knows who we are, it seems. We are regulars, or kind of, so we get the best service and refills quick. Everything is so very tasty at this little restaurant named after a guy named Pete.
Thank you, LB. That poem made me really hungry. Our next poet is Marc Fishbane. Marc is a poet and classical guitar musician who is host to 2 local workshops, DC Poetry and Poetry on the Fringe, both of which meet weekly in the district. He reads at various local poetry centers and is the author of 4 volumes of poetry, Stances in Time, collected poems, Passages in Time, poems from long ago to just the other day with an essay on poetics, 21 poems to dead immortals, 21 poems inspired by a declarative statement, and 21 sonnets stirred, not shaken, and from a time and place. He is also the editor of Poets on the Fringe, an anthology, and Inkblots, Volume 1, an anthology of poems by the DC Poetry Collective. Please welcome Marc.
Hi. Thanks. Could you put on the share? Enable the share screen by on the bottom in the securities tab, just enable participant share. Yes, you see it? No, I haven't done so. So it's very simple. Just on the security tab on the bottom, if you're the host, I just wanted to share. It's an ekphrastic poem, so I wanted people to see the painting. I'd asked before if you could do that. Jonathan, are you capable of that? That's on the security tab at the bottom. You just see you click that, you'll see allow participants share.
Just checking in with Dan. Is that a possibility?
Or if not, then I'll read something else. Sorry.
We'll check with Dan. He's our tech guy. Let me check with him.
Oh, if I don't want to make a whole thing of it, then I'm sorry. I had requested it before because I had some ekphrastic poems of monuments of Washington. I had wanted to show the monument and read the poem, but I'll just read something else. Okay, next time. Thank you. This is called Defining the Transcendental. What animal wakes up in the morning and doesn't want to go to work? The beaver is busy, the hawk is hunting, the squirrel gathers acorns, but we would have others serve us. Only the human animal procrastinates, saying, today I will rest and do nothing. Whenever possible, we eat from the tree of dreams, the fermented tree. We humans like being dizzy. We have learned to brew the hops and make a broth of mushrooms, to be part of the world as other, both part of and observing. So we honor the go-between, spirits, angels, holy ghosts, the alchemist who changes water to wine as easily as blood to gold, and praise the odes of drunken poets stumbling home at dawn. This human imagines paradise as a tavern of laughter, lots of booze, lots of sex, lots of singing along with the band. But there are some who say obedience is a better way. Humans are beasts of burden who must till the land, fill the soda machines, and grease the robots. Meanwhile, the self-elected holy men perform their secret sex, the ones who brought us blasphemy. In one continent, they rip the hearts from the chests of virgins to predict the weather by its steady beat. In another, the torturers reveled in the inquisitions and would burn the town to punish one infidel. Even today, the revelers of passion are stoned and quartered by the bearded elders and their pitiful calls to prayer. The human animal is not to be trusted when sober. The gods we make lust for power. To be idle is contra naturam. Their warning is clear for the human animal. Beware. Only temperance and allegiance can cure the inert laziness and that wakes up in the morning and doesn't want to go to work. And I'll close with a short poem called The Lullabies. There are lullabies locked in a holy place, a birthright of rhymes that a mother sang in her native tongue. These were the first sounds that forever tell me who I am and what I hide. You can know me as you know yourself. To be myself, I must be someone else. For we are 7,000 languages with a different word for tree or moon. Each sound that shapes who we are with infinite subtleties. But at the core is a mother's lullabies and the deep voice of her breathing. Once you slept inside these songs, this is known to you alone. Thank you.
So Jonathan, we can do that now if Marc wants to.
Oh, no, I just read too long. That would take up too much time, but thank you very much.
Are you sure? I mean, if...
Well, yeah, that would not be fair to the other poets. I just had my turn and, I appreciate that very much.
Well, even though we couldn't see your ekphrastic poem, Marc, what you read was really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we now have a special treat for you all. This is our first ever crowdsourced poem. The person to thank for this is Liz Kogan, who brought this to my attention. And she was inspired by, I believe it was an NPR story where NPR, they were inspired by Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. And so they wanted to make a crowdsourced poem, which is basically having different poets submit, you create a prompt, and then the poets, people write poems just based on that prompt. And then they take just little snippets of the different poems to create a brand new poem. So NPR had, I think, thousands of people submitting, and they created a beautiful poem out of that. And we did the same thing. And I was tasked with coming up with the prompt. And I was thinking about how this year is so much different from where we were last year in almost every possible way. So my prompt was, now I see the world with new eyes. And I'm happy to say that we got, I think it was 18 different submissions, all really wonderful, beautiful, powerful, funny poems. I worked to cobble them together into something that I'm very proud of as well. So without further ado, if I could pull this up, this is our first ever crowdsourced poem, Now I See My Life with New Eyes. Oh, and let me tell you the authors. This poem features lines of poetry from Serena Augusto Cox, Dean Blahert, Stanley Chin, Tori L. Collins, Daryl Denning, Mark Fishbane, Lucy Getman, Chris Haley, Donald Illich, Katie Irish, Monica Masiello, Keith David Parsons, P.S. Perkins, Kim Roberts, Heather Scholl, L.B. Sedlacek, and Mary Sesso. And I should add that Dean, Mary, and Don are all members of the Federal Poets, which is a really wonderful organization, DC. I'm also a member. They put on some really good stuff. And we also put out a really great publication called The Federal Poet. It's one of the oldest publications in DC, probably one of the older publications in the United States. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary, so please check it out. And now, without further ado, our first crowdsourced poem, Now I See My Life with New Eyes. And just trying to open it. Now I see my life with new eyes. After winter dug a ditch in my days, I was stuck until pulled out by the yellow of forsythia and the gold of dandelions. I catch a thread of light. Now I see my life with new eyes, where spring on the hill brings cherry blossoms to bloom. But this year, any pleasure found in their beauty is steadied by guilt from police violence, COVID sickness, and overall gloom. Now I see my life with new eyes, where we had before worn pleasure in our smiles. Today we wear it masked. Family members survive, friends of friends gone, masks, distance, isolation, eyes still wide open. Now I see my life with new eyes that rage at injustice that can't be remedied, at so many families broken and in crisis. Always we must beg forgiveness for surviving in the charnel house, for being the ones to sort bones back to names. Now I see my life with new eyes that dampen at the killing of people too brown to be protected and served like I am. It is too easy to claim the eyes of the dead, the eyes of George Floyd.
Yeah.
I don't hear, taste, touch, smell, or see everything. How dare I pretend to? Now I see my life with new eyes, no longer filtering out the gray, only wanting to see in black and white. Yes, now is different, unlike before, as more people understand and act. If they could keep on keeping on with all the dirt the earth has muddied under them, turning size to human power. Now I see my life with new eyes, the eyeballs I stole from the neighbor who sunbathed in his backyard, sleeping, and will hardly notice they're gone. This day I will not think about tomorrow. I will delight in all that exists around me. I am free to choose my path and leave the one I'm on. Now, to see my life, I close my eyes and let my fingers read the braille of your hips, rising like a dune. leaving the east for the west, bringing me closer to the sky. Now I breathe in with new lungs. A trip to the drugstore feels like a vacation. A handshake is a hug. It's not freedom, but I'll have people to talk to and touch. Laughter I can share, fingers and toes to count. I see reality with new eyes, airplanes and skyscrapers. An apple peel curls around my hand, touch like skin on skin. My daughter smiles, leans into me, eager for a bite. Your hand reaching for mine, a miracle. And thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate you all coming out today. Before I pass it back over to Liz, I just want to say some quick thank yous. A huge thank you to Liz Kogan and to Dan Cohen for putting this whole event together. It's incredible. You did this last year too, and it's just one of the most amazing things that happens every year. Thanks to both of you. A very special thanks to Karen Lyon. She is the literary hill. She is the poetic hill. She has given a platform to so many wonderful poets in DC, given us a voice that we might not have had, helped us publish our work, put it out there. This is all thanks to her. And I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to Paris Singer, who has always been there to support us. She's our biggest fan, and just sending lots of love to Paris. Thank you very much, everyone. And now I'm passing it back over to Liz.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was fabulous. What a great poetry open mic. And that poem, that was really powerful. Thank you for putting that together. And thanks to all the poets who contributed. It was really beautiful. We'll have that on the website within a couple of days. I just also want to remind everybody, we had some technical difficulties in the beginning of the event, but I don't want that to stop you from enjoying some of the videos that we were running at the beginning. So please go to our website. Those videos will be up for a while for you to enjoy. Many of the authors who appeared live today have also created videos for you, which you can see on the website. And we couldn't fit all of our fabulous authors into the live event, but many of them have also created videos for you to watch. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We are going to be having a few literary delights this summer, even after today's event. And I'm going to hand it over to Tim in just a moment, but before you go, I want to let you know we are going to be running one more really lovely video from a brand new novelist, Margaret Rodenberg, who just published her debut novel, Finding Napoleon. It came out last month. She has a lovely video for you to enjoy. So don't go yet. Tim?
No, thank you, Liz. Thanks for all the work that you put in there. We're going to turn to the video second. Mostly just want to say thanks to everyone that's turned up today. Again, another plug for the website where you can check the videos, buy these books directly from our eCity Bookshop partners there. And we're looking forward to imagining how next year is going to go as well. So we're already looking forward to that. Perhaps some virtual component, but I'm also very much looking forward to doing this back Easter market with you, Liz, and seeing everyone in person and having a chance to do that. So without any further ado, Liz, do you want to run right into the video here? We can say goodbye to everyone and perhaps a beer at Tuncliffe's in the near future for all of us.
We'll be there. We will be there.
I'm Margaret Rodenberg, author of the historical novel, Finding Napoleon. It's based in part on a real, unfinished novel that Napoleon Bonaparte tried to write. In Finding Napoleon, the defeated emperor finishes writing his idealistic romantic novel, but from his point of view as Europe's most powerful man after he's lost everything. His last lover, audacious Albine de Monttalon, helps narrate their own tale of intrigue, love, and betrayal. To succeed with his plans, Napoleon must learn whom to trust. To survive, Albine must decide whom to betray. I'd like to tell you why I wrote Finding Napoleon and why you might like to read it. For me, the story behind this novel starts when, as a young teen, I moved to France with my U.S. Navy family. There I heard how Napoleon had escaped his exile on the Mediterranean island of Elba, landed on the French coast with 800 soldiers, marched 500 miles to Paris, and reinstated himself as emperor, all without firing a shot. That heroic story stuck with me, far more than the fact that 100 days later, Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo led to his second exile on desolate, remote St. Helena Island in the South Atlantic. But let's jump forward in my life through a business career and well into my second marriage to the moment I came across a mention that Napoleon, when he was 26 years old, had tried to write a romantic novel of love and betrayal. To my delight, the scribbled manuscript still existed. Right then and there, I vowed to finish it for him. Napoleon called his work Clisson et Eugénie, though he later shortened the title to the hero's name, Clisson. I envisioned my Clisson as a complete novel by Napoleon Bonaparte and Margaret Rodenberg. But to ghostwrite for Napoleon, I had to understand him as a person. Oh, not which battles he'd won and lost, not why he invaded Egypt, or worse, Russia, or how he entered into the Louisiana Purchase after his infamous failure in Haiti, but what he thought and felt about himself when he was a young man who hadn't even met his true love, Josephine. The truth is that for most of us, he's a stick figure, a short guy in a funny hat with his hand stuck in his vest. In fact, a third of even that isn't true. He was 5'6", average height for a Frenchman of his time. So you get the challenge in trying to write about Napoleon. Early in my research, I realized the aging emperor himself should finish his youthful manuscript as he looked back on the potential he'd once had, and as he came to grips with what he'd become. For inspiration and to bring you, the reader, a truly authentic experience, I, like Napoleon, traveled thousands of miles to St. Helena Island. It's still British territory, but the French own and maintain its Napoleonic sites, including Longwood House, Napoleon's principal residence on the little island. It was there, standing alone in the haunting rooms of the musty, ramshackle home where Napoleon lived and died, the stick figure became for me a flesh and blood human being. One who is Shakespearean in his genius and in his fatal flaws. So what does that make the novel, Finding Napoleon? Foremost, I hope it is, as Courting Mr. Lincoln author Louis Bayard kindly said, a rousing, delightfully peopled adventure with exquisite scene setting and crackling storytelling. He's one of my favorite authors, so you can see that I'm really proud of that quote. Partly, my novel is the defeated Napoleon's personal battle against his British jailers and how Napoleon changed due to the loyalty and betrayal on St. Helena Island. His last lover, Albine, plays an equal role. A forgotten woman of history, she lacks Napoleon's genius, but as a charming rogue, she rivals him in ambition. When their interests diverge, sparks fly. Meanwhile, intertwined in the St. Helena story, the aging emperor completes his youthful novel, Clisson. Now it's not simply a soldier's love story. It's Napoleon's mythic origin story, told as a father's message to the young son from whom he's been separated. Peopling these stories are the delightful characters Lou Bayard mentions. Among them, there's Toby, an enslaved man who conspires with Napoleon. There's Cipriani, Napoleon's mysterious Corsican henchman. Solomon, a merchant who smuggles Napoleon's messages between continents. There's Albine's husband, Charles, torn between greed and loyalty. and Betsy, a 14-year-old girl whose laughter lightens the emperor's dark days. Within this milieu, what Kirkus Reviews called an intricate tapestry, everyone's motives are suspect. Napoleon, when asked by one of his St. Helena entourage how they could possibly fill the time in exile, said, "Why, we shall write our memoirs." His intent as a world-class propagandist was to cement his reputation. My novel, Finding Napoleon, is meant as entertainment, a memorable voyage to a satisfying conclusion with fascinating characters in a remote time and place. Its message, if you think a novel requires one, is found in an excerpt from the poem by Yevgeny Yevtushenko that I quoted at the front of Finding Napoleon. Power is a small blessing, bad for the nerves. We should be creating masterpieces, masterpieces. I hope you'll take a moment to look at Finding Napoleon, and if you do, that you'll join Napoleon, Albine, the novel's cast of engaging characters, and me in asking, what does it mean to create a masterpiece of your life?